Welcome to the Sustain Annual Conference for 2022. What I really love about the video we've just seen is that we're talking about how to make the future better through food and farming. And I feel absolutely privileged to be chairing this event today. My name is Kath Dalmeny and I'm the Chief Executive of Sustain. The Sustain Alliance brings together about 100 organisations at national level and hundreds more at local and regional levels, working together to achieve a better system of food and farming, just as that video illustrated. I'm just going to do some housekeeping notes in our online world. You know where your own loos are, so I don't need to do that. Please note that this event will be recorded and attendees will receive a link to the recording after the event, along with links to resources and questions and answers that will also be distributed. The chat box down the side of your Zoom screen, we ask that attendees use that chat box for introductions, say who you are, who's here. There are hundreds of people going to be joining us this afternoon, so it might be nice to get to know each other a bit. So that's for introductions, discussions, and networking. However, all inquiries that are not direct questions for the speakers, such as the raising of technical issues or interactions with other delegates, those should be posted in the chat box. The way we're dealing with questions and answers to the panel is different. So there's a Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window, and that allows attendees to ask questions to the speakers during the conference. And my lovely colleague Ruth Westcott will be monitoring that to help bring to the surface your questions that we can put to the panelists. As time permits, the chair and speakers will pick as many questions as we can to answer live. Questions that are liked are automatically sorted by their number, and you can like any question by clicking on the thumb icon below it. Please note that unanswered questions will be wiped away from the Q&A box before the next session, just so you know why they've disappeared. Please do try and keep your questions brief and indicate if your question is aimed at a particular speaker, because that will help us make sure that we ask the right things. And we do reserve, of course, the right to dismiss any questions if they're inappropriate or offensive. So we'll do that. If you're following on Twitter or want to keep the social media buzzing, please use the hashtag #Sustain22, #Sustain22, and follow us on @UKSustain as all one word. Right, that's your housekeeping done. As I said, my name is Kath Dalmeny and I'm the Chief Executive of Sustain. We stand for this: better food, better farming, better lives. I'm really delighted to be welcoming you all. Hundreds of colleagues and friends, all interested in how we make the food and farming system healthy, fair, and sustainable, able to feed ourselves and feed future generations whilst restoring nature and playing a significant part in tackling climate change. And we're here today to talk about the cost of living crisis. I just said a food and farming system that feeds people, but of course the truth is that at the moment, not everybody can afford to feed themselves and their families, let alone in a way that helps everyone to be well and to thrive. Feeling well fed and knowing where your next meal is coming from is currently a luxury for too many people in our country. This should be a source of shame and a motivation for decisive action, and fixing it should be a source of great pride. But not enough of the money in the system is flowing to the right places. You'll hear me say that again. Not enough of the money in the system is flowing to the right places. Before COVID, a fifth of people in the UK were already living in poverty. Due to the cost of living crisis, food and fuel prices are going up, we all know that, but that means that millions of more people in the UK will experience extreme hardship in the coming year. This is a crisis of inequality. People aren't receiving enough income to live on, whether through their wages or the social security safety net. A fifth of food workers receive only the national minimum wage or even lower, which is not enough to live on. Why is it not enough to live on? Our colleagues who provide emergency food aid parcels report that they are overwhelmed by need from people who are falling into crisis. Their services, food supplies and volunteers are depleted and exhausted. Due to punitive rules put in force by the government, 800,000 children from families living in poverty don't qualify to receive a free, nutritious school meal to help them be nourished and to grow and to learn. As a nation, we can afford to fix these things. We can, but not enough of the money in the system is flowing to the right place. My Sustain colleagues, Vicky Hurd and James Woodward, released a report last week showing how farmers receive far less than a penny profit on typical packs of staple foods sold in high street supermarkets: carrots, beef burgers, apples, bread, cheese, ordinary foods. How can we expect farmers to grow food, look after animals, the soil and our water, and make the climate transition unless we pay them properly for their hard work, so that they can generate more than a mere crumb, well, less than a crumb sometimes, of profit? It can be better than this. It really can. When it goes well, food and farming can be a source of fantastic food, where local food partnerships work with local authorities within supported national policy frameworks. More good stuff gets done. My colleagues in the Sustainable Food Places Network and the Food for the Planet campaign have shown this to be true. We need this approach, the infrastructure of change, to be recognised, replicated, and put on a secure footing. That takes policy. That takes decisions that we want to fix this. That takes more of us being confident to campaign for change. Where the money flows to the right places, more people are able to eat well and not fall into food crisis. Where there are food partnerships, good work thrives, and decision makers take action on things like procurement, land use, and supporting good food enterprises. Given the chance, nature and soil recovers and can absorb millions of tons of carbon. Traded in a better way that is fair and returns a fair profit, food and farming can be more profitable, enabling investment in decent wages and environmental improvements. I'm really excited that during 2023, Sustain will be working with our Alliance members to support growth of retail in farmer-focused supply chains, and also to run pilots on how to make ecologically grown food more affordable and accessible to local communities. We need to work together to make change happen. Now, this could all sound like storytelling, fairy tale maybe, but it's real. In this virtual room where we gather today, there are hundreds of people who hold the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, the practical and the policy solutions. Personally, because it's difficult to keep up hope in this day and age, but personally, I take great hope from the growth of the Nature Friendly Farmers Network, for example, the Lovely Land Workers Alliance, the Better Food Traders Network, the community caterers providing nutritious food to people in their local areas, supported by local authorities as social investors. The people working to transition from food aid to food trade, returning good food and more money and jobs to local areas. You, my friends, are beacons of hope. From my own home, here I am sitting in East London at the moment in England, I also look across the borders to Wales and Scotland and see even more beacons of hope in the policies that are being put in place to provide school meals to all the children who need them, to invest in local food partnerships, and to take decisive action on climate change. The trouble is that much of this good work happens despite the system. It's very hard work. It's like pushing a very heavy ball uphill. There are many barriers. Governments come and go like yo-yos these days, and not many of them really get food policy, nor how we can achieve the agroecological transition in the practicalities and the finance of doing so. We have to remember, be facing an economic recession where the arguments about where the money flows will be ever more intense. Sometimes we feel and will feel like we're moving backwards rather than forwards, but we must persist, and we'll reflect on that in one of the sessions today. But during this conference, let's keep in our hearts that we're here today to bring the solutions into the spotlight, as well as the wonderful campaigners and champions who promote them. Our task for this conference is to consider what we can do with the power of working in alliance to help these succeed. So on that note, let us move now to the first session of our conference. I ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Ha-Joon Chang, who's an economist and author of the new book, Edible Economics. What a great title. A Hungry Economist Explains the World. He'll be in conversation with my colleague, Ben Reynolds, who is Deputy Chief Executive of Sustain. Over to Professor Ha-Joon Chang and to Ben. Welcome.
Hello. I'm Ben Reynolds, I'm Deputy Chief Exec of Sustain. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Ha-Joon Chang, Professor of Economics at SOAS, which is the part of the University of London. Ha-Joon is one of the world's leading economists. His books include Economics, the User's Guide, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, and his most recent book, Edible Economics, A Hungry Economist Explains the World. Ha-Joon, I absolutely love this book. I have so many questions I want to put to you, as I'm sure the audience does. And we'll have time in about 20 minutes to take some questions from the audience. I appreciate that with this book, your intention was to make economics more accessible by, as you put it, I think, dangling the carrot of food stories to lure people in. So, or the, as you put it, the ice cream used to get kids to eat their greens.
That's right.
But whether you meant to or not, you've produced a really fascinating history of the industrialization of the food system.
Yep.
And I think it's no accident that you used food as the way to illustrate these different aspects of economic theory. Do you think you could have told the same stories if you'd used fashion or another sector? I was just wondering, why food?
Well, I mean, it's a personal choice. I have two passions in life. One is economics, the other is food. You know, I love eating, I love cooking, I love talking about food. I love reading about the food. So I thought that this is a nice way of drawing people into economics because almost everyone is interested in food. Very few people are interested in economics because it's boring, it's full of jargons, and that looks very difficult. But my view is that, in a capitalist society, without every citizen knowing at least some economics, democracy is meaningless. You know? Because so many decisions are bound up in the economic decisions that we need to know these things. You know, I mean, it's not just about interest rate and energy bills and food prices. It's also about the culture and heritage. You know, I met even some British people who try to defend the monarchy by saying that it brings in the tourist revenue. You know, I'm not a monarchist, but what a demeaning way of defending your institution, depending on the institution that you believe to be at the foundation of your society. So it's come to that. So I really have been in a kind of personal crusade for the last 15 years or so, writing books for the general public. But this time around, I'm just throwing everything I have to people to beg them to learn economics. You said that this is a bit like the food stories in the book are a bit like the ice cream that some of your mothers might have used to bribe you into eating broccolis or the Brussels sprouts. But my bribe is actually even better than that because the food story comes first. You know? So if you don't feel like it, you can just stop in the middle and just get the food stories and ignore the economic stories. My wish is that the writing is interesting enough that you get sucked into economic story by mistake almost. So I really hope that this book gets at least some people interested in economics, which they might have found too dry, too boring, too difficult.
I think you're underselling yourself. It is really fascinating, and I think I was really struck by how many links there are between the food and the economic stories. So I'm going to get stuck into a few of them, and there are so many themes that I think would be of interest to our audience today. We won't have time to cover all of them, but I wanted to start with trade and standards. And so in the book, you talk about the importance of selective protectionism in seeing the growth of certain sectors in countries historically. So like Germany with rye production
Mhm.
and Korean economic growth in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And this is a key argument that you use to question free market and neoliberal ideology. And as you say in your chapter on beef, that many of these free trade deals historically were one way,
That's right.
with most nations doing so under compulsion, not out of free choice, often in unequal treaties or forced into free trade with their colonial masters, who had high tariff rates on imports.
Yep.
I think delegates would be really interested in hearing more about your thoughts on this and these examples which are relevant to our work on trade standards.
Yes, well, in the last few decades, this free market discourse has really dominated our discussion about public policy and our social goals and so on. So a lot of people have come to think anything free is a good thing. Yeah, I mean, freedom is a good thing, but we have to question freedom for whom, freedom to do what, you know? So if you are giving freedom to, I don't know, American chicken factories to export the chlorine-washed chicken, you know, I have a problem with it, but you know, it's a free trade, you know. So that we first need to be very careful in that just thinking that free trade means freedom for all, you know. No, it means freedom for the traders, yeah. So that as you briefly mentioned, in the 19th century, there were all these so-called unequal treaties that signed with weaker countries at the time, China, you know, Thailand, Iran, and so on, basically forcing these countries to practice free trade, whereas the trade partner may or may not practice free trade, depending on what they feel like. You know? So in that kind of situation, you can even see that free trade was imposed by unfree means, you know, basically gunboat diplomacy. You know? So we need to be extremely careful about this the rhetoric of free trade. And yeah, when you think about the actually real life examples, there are many examples where you needed the protectionism for various purposes. So South Korea protecting its auto industry and electronics industry and so on in the 1960s and 70s and 80s was an attempt to raise what economists call infant industries. You know, if you set up a new industry in a relatively backward economy, unless you nurture it and protect and nurture it in the same way that we protect and nurture our children, this industry will be wiped out. You know, so that's one reason to protect. Another reason is that for the you know social reasons, you know, like imposing the food standards. You know? And yeah, I mean, the free trade economists that often argue, oh, well, you know, you don't have to buy it if you don't like it. But the problem is that when you release these substandard products into the food system, people with lower income are forced by the circumstances to buy them. You know? So actually, we need the protection and regulation in those areas. You know? So there are many examples, but you know, we have relatively little time, so let's move on to the next topic.
I suppose moving on from sort of a different aspect of protection to social insurance and welfare. Your book touched on many issues where food has birthed great new ideas, such as your chapter on rye and the birth of the welfare state in Germany. And I love your description of the welfare state, not as a way to give free stuff to poorer people, but rather it's a package of social insurances, that it's cheaper by buying in bulk, i.e. nationwide through taxation, rather than left for individuals to negotiate.
Exactly.
And that this concept was born out of a move to protect rye producers in Germany by an anti-socialist leader, Bismarck, is all the more fascinating. But I suppose flipping this analogy back on its head, just wondering, how far do you think the welfare state should extend? In the UK, it includes healthcare, the largest cost of the NHS being diet-related disease. You know, and also with free school meals, healthy start vouchers, which we have here. The state is in some cases subsidizing food, healthier food. Do you see that this is or maybe will happen more internationally?
Oh yeah, it has to, because the point is that all human beings have some basic needs. The nutritious food, the the right to have a childhood and education, the basic the infrastructure services like electricity and energy and so on. So I think these many the rich countries try to include the provision of these things into the welfare system. Sometimes they are given in kind, like American food stamp. I mean, you get these stamps that you can use only to buy the food. I mean, sometimes it's given in cash, like unemployment benefit or child support. But basically, we need to extend this idea of well-being to have a more integrated approach to these things. As you correctly mentioned, a lot of NHS bills are racked up by the food-related diseases. A lot of the NHS beds are occupied by the patients who cannot be released into community because you have eviscerated the social support system. So we need an integrated approach so that if you want to promote healthy eating through public policy action, you just you cannot just kind of make the nutritious food cheaper and hope for the best. The people actually need more time to be able to cook and explore new recipes and so on. A lot of the poor people have to do 2 jobs, even 3 jobs. They don't have time. They get tired. They just buy the processed the dinner, which are very bad for health. Because they got a lot of the salt and the sugar and whatnot. Also, that you need the better, if you like, urban planning. I mean, this is less of a problem in the UK, but in the US, I mean, you even have this concept of food desert. So there, the urban the areas are so sprawled that sometimes, especially if you're poor and don't have a car, you cannot go and buy the nutritious, the healthy food, even if you want it. So you end up eating in McDonald's because that's the only place you can get any edible food within the kind of 1 hour walking distance.
We do.
So I think we need a really integrated approach between health system and food policy and labor market policy and urban planning.
And we do have food deserts here as well in the UK. It's actually a great.
No, of course you do, but I'm saying there is far more serious.
Yeah, I can quite imagine. And there's actually a fantastic piece of work out from which they've done with various academics, which maps some of that access around the UK, and it links very much with sort of supermarkets particularly. And actually that takes me on to my next point. And I wanted to sort of touch on interventionism in the market. So successive UK governments with different political viewpoints have left food and farming to the market, and they've left supermarkets define policy, making it one less thing for them to have to worry about. And with this power consolidated in the hands of a few businesses, it's squeezed many other parts of the supply chain, particularly farmers. And I'm just wondering, do you think governments should intervene in supply chains more? I mean, perhaps this links to your chapter on banana about the need for public policies to ensure maximum benefits for the local economy, particularly when dealing with multinational corporations. So I was just wondering, what lessons can we learn from history or learn internationally? Do you see this model reaching a breaking point where no one wants to supply supermarkets, or in fact is able to supply this sort of model?
Yeah, no, my view is that some of these, if you like, innovations that are have been carried out by these supermarket chains, they are productive. By buying in bulk, they reduce the unit cost and they supply, the things that far from where they are grown. I mean, that is not necessarily a good thing, but it can be a very powerful force of enabling people to get access to the wider range of food and so on. But like all things, the fact that something can be effective, something can be efficient, doesn't mean that it will always be so. It doesn't mean that it will benefit everyone. To ensure those things, you need government intervention. You need the proper regulation on the food standards. You need intervention in terms of the kind of prices they pay to the farmers and the farm workers, and the regulation and working conditions on the farming the establishments, because if you squeeze the farmers very hard, then they try to survive by making working conditions harsh in farms, and then no one wants to do it, so they end up importing foreign laborers who are horribly mistreated. So yeah, I mean, you need all these regulations. And now that in some quarters people have argued, yeah, I mean that those are bad things, but that we need to solve those through consumer choice and market forces. So that they've argued that let's force these companies to release all the information on working conditions in the farm where things are grown, and nutritional values, and the nature of their global supply chain. Well, I mean, no one has done that, but even if it can be done, I think it will be totally useless, because the struggle through life, we don't have time to absorb and process all this information. And unless you have the good scientific knowledge and a lot of time, I mean, you cannot really work out whether the things that you bought for your dinner is really the best nutrition you can get from, I don't know, the 11-pound budget you had tonight. I mean, this is just kind of avoiding the problem. So that we need the government to do all the basic regulations. I mean, consumers need to exercise their choices with better information and so on, but the groundwork has to be done through government regulation, because the individual, the farms, individual consumers, they are powerless against these giant supermarkets.
I think that's a view that will definitely chime with a lot of our members and a lot of the audience. I wanted to zoom out a little bit. You talked in your book about this really interesting term. I've not heard it before, but I think it sort of chimes with a sort of food analogy: economic monocropping. So you used food to draw many analogies with economic models and theories. I suppose turning it back around, do you think that the sort of economic monoculture, as you put it, so neoclassical economics, is, does it have a positive or negative effect on our food system in the UK or globally? And I'm just wondering, some of the other economic models you talk about, I'm just wondering if they were adopted, might they help us to improve our food system and deal with some of the negative impacts that it has on people and planet?
Yeah, the point I'm making in this book, and also in my previous book, the Economics, the User's Guide, is that there are many different ways of doing economics, if you like. So there are at least 9 main schools of economics. It could be easily 20 if you include some of the smaller, the more recent schools, split up some of the larger schools into sub-schools. And all these schools have their strengths and weaknesses, because they have been designed to explain different things. They are interested in different economic phenomena. They have different views on how, for example, the technology evolves. They have different views on human nature. They have different assumptions about politics and ethics. So no school is good for everything. And unfortunately, since the 1980s, one school, known as the neoclassical school of economics, has become so dominant that other schools are kind of, well, some of them have practically disappeared, the others are disappearing. And this is making our kind of intellectual diet in terms of economics very, very poor, because you are just using one type of theory to do everything. It's like, I don't know, I mean, trying to cook everything with cabbage. I mean, cabbage is brilliant for some things, but if you try to, I don't know, make the pudding with cabbage, I mean, I don't think it will work that well. So this economic monocropping has become a big issue, because when you try to apply one theory developed to deal with a particular phenomenon, in a particular way with particular political and ethical assumptions, you sometimes do very well, but very often you go horribly wrong because you are using the wrong theory. So yes, I mean that in the same way that the genetic diversity, the kind of polyculture rather than monoculture is important for farming and more broadly nature. Economics that has to be more diverse. Unfortunately, that we are we have been fed on only one particular type of economic theories.
No, it's a really good analogy. In the same way, we have not reached the end of history, as I think it was put in the end of the 90s. We have not reached the end of economics. There is room for debate and diversity in it. I wanted to take some questions from the audience. This one that came in from Sean Turner.
Yeah.
So do you think that campaigners should be bolder in labeling issues as a result of a broken capitalist system, or do you think doing so is off-putting for many people to try to get them engaged in the debate? And the example that Sean gives is this term, the junk food cycle, which is a term that Henry Dimbleby has famously coined in his national food strategy. And that sort of linking to transnational corporations' desire for profits leading to less nutritious food on shelves.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not a social campaigner, so this is one area where I should be asking questions to you rather than the other way around. But my view is that you have to call a spade a spade. I mean, this pussyfooting, trying to be overly nice. I mean, they in the end don't work. Although I mean that if you try to be too aggressive, then it might just repel people rather than drawing them in and give you a chance to persuade them. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, different people will see it differently, but if you read my book, I could have been a lot angrier and shouty, but I try not to do that. So I mean, it's that really that you have to decide it according to the audience and the occasion. I don't think that there's, I mean, it's something an economist can really answer.
I suppose going on to back to the previous question, the previous point, just wanted to bring together two questions from the audience. So one, why do you think that neoclassical perspective has dominated all discussions? And I suppose leading off from that, what sort of mix, what economic heterodox mix do you think offers the most progress for people and planet?
Yeah. On the first question, it's a complex question because it has to do with lots of different factors. The particular way that people have been viewing, science. I mean, which economists claims to be, which it is not. And the kind of, if you like, internal the power structure of the profession, and I mean there are many things, but I think one reason why it has become so dominant is that neoclassical economics starts its analysis after taking the existing distribution of income, wealth, and power as given. And then they try to see whether you could improve things. Now, through that way, it has, of course, made some useful proposals and so on, but it is very reluctant to question the underlying social order. And that has made it palatable to people from people with money and power who benefit from this status quo. So as a result, these economists got more kind of platform in the public eyes. That there's more funding. There's more kind of social recognition that given to these people. So that's one important reason. Although I'm not saying that this is the only reason. Now, what theories that should we use? I mean, no. I mean, actually, neoclassical theory can be very useful for certain things. If you want to regulate monopoly power, but supermarkets, neoclassical economics actually can give you a lot of useful insights. But my view is that what theory you should use that depends on the questions you're asking and the context in which you're asking the same question. And indeed in the real world, successful economies have achieved their successes in very diverse ways. For example, you are probably familiar with the sort of strong welfare state model combined with the active labor market policy in Scandinavia. But another successful economy, Singapore, it is really something that you could not have imagined, because on the one hand, it has a free trade and welcoming attitude towards transnational corporations. But at the same time, 90% of the land is owned by the government. 85% of housing is supplied by the government-owned housing corporation. And a staggering 22% of GDP is produced by state-owned enterprises. I mean, it doesn't necessarily own 100% in these enterprises, but yeah. So there's no single way of succeeding. And likewise, in terms of using theories, there's no single ideal mixture. We all have different tastes. We want different things. So. And we have kind of the different things at our disposal, whether they're ingredients or cooking utensils. So we all end up cooking in different ways. Even if we are told to cook, I don't know, pasta or the fish or whatever. So in the same way exactly how you should cook these things in economic policy terms it's not set. I mean, it's that depends on the goals that your society have. I mean, like the Kath was the earlier commenting on the starving children. I personally find it absolutely scandalous that in one of the richest societies that the humanity has ever built, has literally millions of people starving, children stealing lunch from their mates and bringing in a slice of moldy bread. But obviously the people who are running this government don't see it as a problem, and they are more worried about the bond prices. So that we have different goals. Exactly what you want will determine what economic theories that you should use, what issues that you are trying to address, whether it's a monopoly power but the supermarkets, or is that development of so-called infant industries or food standards. You will have to use different economic theories.
I was hoping to bring some more questions from the audience, but I think we are pretty much out of time, which is, I can see people nodding here. There's lots of great questions in the Q&A, so hopefully you'll have a bit of time to stay on and maybe plow through a few of those, ranging from regulation, retained EU law bills, and donut economics. Hopefully all stuff will be fascinating to get your insights on, but I'm going to have to draw this to an end. I really wanted to extend my thanks to you, Ha-Joon, for joining us, and to encourage everyone to go out and buy your book, Edible Economics. Before I hand over to my colleague Orla to start the next session, I wanted to leave everybody with a quote from the book that I think should speak to many on this call. This is about limes and climate change. So lime may have been an effective antidote to scurvy, but it required executive action by one of the most powerful institutions in the world at the time, the Royal Navy, to use it as an effective way and save sailors' lives in quantity. So it is with climate change. We know the solutions, but like the Royal Navy and the lime, we cannot leave their implementation to individual choices in the market. We have to use all the mechanisms of collective action at our disposal. Local and national governments, international cooperation, and global agreements to make sure that those solutions are carried out. And top of your list was food regulations. Thank you very much, Professor Ha-Joon Chang, and I'd now like to hand back over to my colleague Orla.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. We'll just test all of our lines now. I'm hoping that we are going to have fellow panelists soon, visible next to me. I'm just going to introduce them to you and then hand over to each of them to give us an introduction. So thank you very much for joining me. I can see Kat. Kat, so I'll start with you. Catherine Jenner joined the Obesity Health Alliance in 2022 after 15 years of working with Consensus Action on Salt, Sugar and Health. She then, you led the setting up of Action on Sugar and supported the implementation of the sugar reduction policy, as well as other key policies such as the soft drinks industry levy. We're also joined by Sabine Goodwin, who's responsible for IFAN's advocacy and research work as its support of hundreds of frontline independent food aid organisations. She has recently led work to co-develop cash first referral leaflets aiming to reduce the need for food banks in local authorities across the UK. And finally, we've got Sean Spears, who's Executive Director at Green Alliance. Sean became the Exec Director in June 2017. He was previously Chief Executive of CPRE, the Countryside Charity, for 13 years. And from 1994 to 1999, he was MEP for London South East, serving on the European Parliament's Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining us today. Really pleased to have you. We're going to just start by, I'm going to hand over to you so that you can brief our guests a little bit on what's been happening in the last 6 months. You know, what we've won, what we've lost, where the government is at in terms of its priorities. I'm going to leave it to you to choose. I think I'll probably just frame this by saying somebody recently said in one of the WhatsApp groups that I'm in, described it as like living through a fever dream. So I think that's probably the best description that I've had of politics recently. But I'm going to leave it to you to explain for your sector what's been happening. Sabine, as the conference is about cost of living, could we start with you, please, and what's been happening in your network of food banks and the level of need?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Sabine. I work with the Independent Food Aid Network, and we represent hundreds of independent organisations distributing charitable food aid across the whole of the UK. Our membership includes over 550 independent food banks. Our vision is of a country without the need for charitable food aid, where adequate and nutritious food is affordable to all. And we advocate for this through what we call a cash first approach to food insecurity. So we're asking for a social security system that's fit for purpose and wages that match the cost of living as well as living hours. Right now, as the cost of living crisis worsens, our priority calls are targeted cash first interventions, either through benefits or one-off payments for low income households through this winter, and bringing forward the uprating of benefits that's very welcome for April 2023, but isn't coming soon enough. Ultimately, I mean, we want to see many changes to the social security system. Obviously, wages and job security are key, but ultimately, we want to see a living income for all. So in terms of what's been happening recently, I mean, first and foremost, as Kath made clear, there's been a poverty crisis in the UK for some time. Pre-pandemic, 22% of people were living in poverty. DWT data, government data shows that 43% of households on universal credit were reporting severe or moderate food insecurity up to April 2020, so just as the pandemic started. The government brought in the weekly £20 uplift and food insecurity levels fell, so 16% less food insecurity in those households. But of course, in October 2021, a year ago now, just over a year ago, universal credit was cut, and soaring energy and food and other basic costs are pushing more people into poverty. And it's critical to always remember that 2.1 million people on legacy benefits never received that increase of £20 per week. So what our members are seeing are more and more people of every age being impacted by and falling into poverty, and more and more people needing support from every cohort of people. So more people who are disabled, more families, more older people, more people impacted by sanctions, and more people impacted by benefit deductions, more people who are on no recourse to public funds needing their support. And people who were receiving support before the cost of living increases are also needing regular support and facing more increasingly more complex problems, and many are falling into destitution. But against this backdrop, and this is what's really changed this year, is that our members are struggling to cope. We've run 4 surveys of our members since May of this year, and different sets of organisations have responded, so different data sets each time. But the picture that has emerged has been clear and consistent. It's not only unacceptable that people are having to resort to charitable food aid, but what's clear is that this response to poverty is unsustainable. In recent months, food and financial donations have fallen and surplus food supply has dwindled, while the quality of surplus food has been impacted, but demand has continued to surge. In our most recent survey published in November, 1 in 5 organisations reported having to reduce the size of their food parcels, while 75% of organisations had been impacted by supply issues. October's survey saw 1 in 4 organisations reporting needing to reduce the size of their food parcels, and 82% struggling to access the supply to meet rising demand. In both surveys, most organisations said they would need to reduce the size of their food parcels, or even to turn people away if demand continued at the rate it was at the time that they reported, or if it continued to rise. Meanwhile, food bank staff and volunteers are reporting the impact of what they're seeing on their own mental health. They're talking about how they're exhausted and how they feel overwhelmed by not being able to see an end in sight to this increasing demand. Independent grassroots providers are bound to feel the pressure earlier than the well-established Trussell Trust network, which is linked to major funding and supermarket supply. The same happened at the beginning of the pandemic, when panic buying impacted on independent food banks immediately. But by the summer of this year, even Trussell Trust food banks were reporting the impact of rising demand in terms of their capacity to cope. At that point, we worked with the Trussell Trust and Feeding Britain to write a letter to the Prime Minister calling for an end for the need for our services. Over 3,000 frontline staff and volunteers signed the letter that Food Bank managers co-delivered to number 10 Downing Street. Since then, the Trussell Trust has launched an emergency appeal for funding for the first time in its 25-year history. But the Trussell Trust represents probably around 15% of charitable food aid provision in the UK. So the income being generated by that appeal won't go far, despite appearances. And we know most people struggling to afford food from Food Standards Agency data won't access a food bank in any case. So, of course, first and foremost, central, national and local governments must take action to address the inadequacy of incomes. Employers have key roles to play, but there are other ways that we can change the food banking narrative from our perspective. We need a joined up approach. Advocacy on ending the need for food banks needs to be joined up with fundraising efforts. So iPhone is calling for donors to write to their MPs, urging actions to address poverty. And we're also calling for financial donations so that food banks can take a flexible approach. There's no reason why food banks need to give out food parcels. They can give out vouchers, they could give out cash grants. There's other ways of providing support other than the food parcel that has become normalised in our society, unfortunately. And we're calling for funders to do all they can to ensure a real living wage and living hours so that they are a priority, and support for food banks means that they can take a flexible approach and not necessarily always give out food parcels. And I'll just quickly reflect on some positives that have emerged despite the worsening crisis. It's clearer than ever that charitable food aid, the charitable food aid response to poverty is unsustainable, that we've reached the end of the road in terms of responding this way to poverty. It's clearer than ever that cash first interventions work. The uplift to universal credit reduced food insecurity, and the cost of living payments in July and November immediately saw some reduction in need for food banks. It's very temporary, but we did see that, and we heard that from our members anecdotally. And more food banks are distributing vouchers, allowing people to have more choices, and even giving these to agencies to distribute, to take food banks out of the equation. And we feel the cash first message is getting through. One example is the popularity of our work to co-develop cash first referral leaflets. We worked in nearly 100 local authorities across Scotland, England and Wales. And the Scottish Government is about to publish its groundbreaking plan to end the need for food banks. And finally, for the first time, frontline food aid teams have joined forces to say very clearly that there should be an end for the need for their services. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sabine. That was sobering, but a very useful thing for us to hear and put everything that we're going to talk about today into that context. I think one of the reasons why we were so keen to have you here and also your fellow panelists was that we have seen increasingly the cost for living being used as an excuse for certain things, including deregulation, which is a neat link through to you, Kat, because we did see, didn't we, the government bowing to pressure from the backbenches to allow the continued sale of bog-offs on the ground, buy one, get one free on junk food, on the grounds that this was a solution to the cost of living crisis. So I think having a reminder that actually this is layered on top of a pre-existing poverty crisis is sobering and necessary before we move on. Thank you so much. So Kat, over to you and your take on what's been happening in obesity policy making and the cost of living.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me and all the great work that Sustain do. And are you hearing me okay? Because I've had to go to editing.
We are, and actually I should probably tell people Kat has COVID, but is soldiering through to help us out today. Thank you so much for
got my blanket and my Barocca. Thank you. And thank you to Professor Ha-Joon Chang as well. I think it was so interesting. I remember reading how he had discovered how economics affects every dimension of our lives, which I think is something that we have discovered, how health of the planet and its inhabitants have affected every dimension of our lives. So I think it's really, really great to have you here. Healthy and secure populations are the foundations for healthy and secure economies, simple as. Yet somehow, despite nutrition, or the lack thereof, being the #1 cause of early death and early disease in our country and around the world, I still find it curious how seldom the all-importance of food is recognised, except of course by those in these rooms. So I was asked to speak a review of the year, wins and losses, on health improvement or obesity prevention policy. This isn't a year when the phrase "a week is a long time in politics" has never been truer. I decided not to prepare what I was going to say until this week because it's been changing so quickly. Little did I know that I should have waited until lunchtime. I will come back to that cliffhanger. But to many, it might seem counterintuitive that not having an abundant food supply can cause obesity, but infrequent, low-quality meals can increase a person's weight. Childhood obesity is really hidden hunger. So when we talk about food, it can't be just quantity versus quality. It has to be both. It's been a real roller coaster of a year. I'll touch on a few pieces that were announced as part of Boris Johnson's obesity strategy in 2020, following consultations, campaigns, and research that many of us were very heavily involved in. So a year ago this week, I think, the Food Promotion and Placement Regulation 21 was made in England and supported enthusiastically with plans to come in April. Then it was delayed to 2022. And then, although the locations restriction, so that's where you can place unhealthy food near checkouts and islands, that's coming as planned, despite opposition. But the multi-buy restrictions element, which is the buy one, get one free that you mentioned, has been delayed until 2023. In early April, the calories started being labelled on menus in out-of-home businesses. And at the end of April, the Health and Care Act 22 was granted royal assent, including a ban on advertising high in fat, salt, or sugar foods on TV before 9 o'clock and online paid for advertising. I'll call that the junk food marketing restrictions. And that was due to come in January 2023, about 25 days away. And Boris announced the first U-turn in May, saying the delay was due to cost of living. And then Truss in September doubled down on this, the same week that I started this job, suggesting that she would throw bog-off advertising, the soft drinks industry levy, the whole lot under the bus. Needless to say, we're not very happy about this. So yes, 2022 has seen a rising cost of living crisis. And you may recall there were suggestions that the government was going to be reversing these health promoting measures in order to remove constraints on businesses and to drive economic growth. Now, government officials don't just consider one piece of the story when it comes to making economic decisions. They try to look at the whole picture in the round. What impact regulations will have on businesses, what effects will have on individuals, on their health provision services, where would these cost savings be felt, what are the intended and unintended consequences. The junk food marketing restrictions, the government's own analysis estimated that the health benefits would be around 2 billion and would provide NHS savings of around 50 million, and social care savings of 40 million, positive on balance. So back to that cliffhanger, quite surprised to hear the chair of the Health Select Committee in Parliament this lunchtime that the government intends to announce tomorrow a delay in bringing in the advertising restrictions until 2025. So if you recall, they were planned for January. Now, this can't be due to cost of living. Even the now Chancellor Jeremy Hunt defended these policies only a matter of weeks ago in his capacity as an ex-health minister. As Orla said, cost of living crisis is not an excuse for deregulation or for inaction on evidence-based policy making. We know the reasons for delaying and scrapping health promotion measures are purely ideological. They're not evidence-based. So the question, what are we dealing with this government? I'm going to say it. It is a weak government that cares more about internal party management. By that, I mean hardline libertarian MPs, and to what I view as unscrupulous food companies that have been lobbying for this delay for months or years, than it cares about children's health or about levelling up. Right now, child obesity and related conditions such as type 2 diabetes are at a devastating all-time high. Those from more deprived backgrounds are more than twice as likely to be living with overweight or obesity. And research shows that restrictions on marketing would have reduced the number of children with excess weight. So now those children are facing the same devastating health trajectory because efforts to improve their health are being undermined. Families already have to choose between cheap, readily available, nutrient-poor, energy-dense foods versus more costly, healthy options. This is not going to help those families. So yes, there have been wins, although I said I'd be positive, there have been wins. We managed to keep the soft drinks industry levy. It really was at risk that it was going to be going out with the mini budget. The locations restrictions have come in and we're already starting to see an impact of that. We have the calorie labelling and we have a sugar reduction report, which may not seem a big thing, but we've been calling for that to see what's been happening with that programme for 2 years now. So as Hajin said earlier, it's up for government to do the groundwork, but apparently now it is up to us rather than government to help make the healthier choice the easier and the more affordable choice. So after this, I'm going to be gathering together troops to express our disappointment on this move to delay junk food marketing. Tomorrow, the announcement is expected to be made. And really, seeing as I have you all here, I'm going to make the call. We would be looking to you to raise your voices in support, really, and shaming the government and their failure to protect child health. And I'm trying to look how many people are here. Nearly 350 of you. I think that'd be 350 really important advocates for child health to stand up to this attack. So there we go. I'm not sure that's positive enough for you, Orla, but that's my bit.
Thank you, Kat. That's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, that great rallying of the troops there. I'm sure we'll be able to help you amplify your message from tomorrow whenever we've got more details. Now we're going to move to you, Sean. I'm just going to draw some links from what Sabine said earlier, actually, about I suppose noting the risks there of relying on the redistribution of surplus food. Obviously, we're noticing more and more people want to see less waste in the food system. So, obviously, people are trying to drive that out of their supply chains, which means there's less to redistribute. But also, there are way better means to support people that are preferable in terms of dignity and funding. But also just drawing on the theme that Kat was talking about there about decisions being made for ideological reasons and not necessarily being evidence-based. And again, I hope you waited to this morning to write your piece, because we've seen, obviously, we were all talking about COP, and then suddenly we were talking about the Cumbrian mine this morning, and also it appears that some parliamentarians have been writing their speeches off the cuff, if nobody noticed that, which does seem a very peculiar way of making announcements in the House of Parliament. So why don't I take that moment to hand over to you and give you the challenge, Sean, of drawing all of this together into your sector and telling us about recent challenges on the cost of living, on changes of government, what's been happening, what's been won and lost.
Great, thanks, Orla. So I'm going to concentrate a bit on farming. Green Alliance is a think tank. One of the bits of work we're doing at the moment is trying to look at how we can get from our finite land area the carbon sequestration, the food and the nature that we need, and the choices we've got to make in that. When he asked me to speak today, Ben asked me to inject some hope, which is a hell of a task. I guess I can say with some confidence that in terms of kind of patterns over the last year, November and December have been better than September and October, when we had Liz Truss's government and what looked like a kind of full-scale assault on a lot of the environmental policies that we work with for
for umpteen years. Nevertheless, looking at the whole year, I think there is a sense that things have stalled or gone backwards. A year ago, it was just after the COP26 in Glasgow. Nature had been put on the agenda of the COP in a way that had never been done before. We had Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Goodness, how I miss him. Thanks, Orla. But Boris Johnson really did put nature on the agenda and had a really clear commitment. I know a lot of people are very cynical about it, but a very clear commitment to climate action. There was frustration at the slow pace of farming reform, but I think nevertheless there was a sense that it could be transformational, and there was a pride in the idea that the UK was leading the way. This was genuinely world leading. We could have a new public money for public goods agenda for farming, which could be good for farmers, good for consumers, good for nature, and good for combating climate change. In fact, Orla, you mentioned earlier the events in the last 24 hours. I was just looking at the draft of the report we're bringing out just before Christmas, and came across the line, if the government gets it right, the UK's environmental land management schemes and land use framework could inspire positive change globally in the same way that the country's decision to end the use of coal has done. So that's a little bit that we might have to edit shortly. But nevertheless, the stuff was going in the right direction. Obviously, it's been a year of government turmoil. More significantly, and as we just heard, it's been a year of kind of extreme concern about the cost of living, predating Ukraine, but intensified by the war in Ukraine. And I'm aware that some of the stuff I'm talking about can seem quite abstract compared with Sabine and what Catherine are talking about. But nevertheless, global warming, global heating of 1.2 degrees, which we have now, is already impacting on food prices, and that is going to get worse. So one of the things that we've tried to do, certainly in terms of energy debates, is pull together is to see off the opposition to net zero, which is coming from a kind of rump of the Conservative Party, the Action on Net Zero group, and make absolutely clear that there's no incompatibility between achieving net zero and tackling high energy prices. And I would say the same for food prices. So there's a great coalition now between environment groups and social justice anti-poverty groups called Warm This Winter. I think Well Fed This Winter is clearly a part of that. What we need to do is keep the pressure on change to tackle climate change and restore nature, both of which are existential threats to people in the longer term, and say that we can have that at the same time as we protect people's livelihoods going into a really difficult winter. So in conclusion, the other thing that gives me hope is that the government is still committed to net zero by 2050, is committed to turning around the decline of nature by 2030, so we get nature positive. To do that, we will need serious land use and farming change. At the moment, the farming and land use is responsible for 12% of greenhouse gas emissions. By 2050, it will have to be a net carbon sink, where it'll have to be carbon negative. The report we're bringing out shortly does set out some ideas of how we think we can achieve that at the same time as we can have better diet and yeah, kind of more nature, good diets, carbon sequestration. But what we need for that, and what is so far lacking, is a clear framework and the government set out some clear pathways and be clear on what the trade-offs are, because this stuff hasn't been done anywhere in the world. We're quite low in the, it's baby steps so far, but it is seriously important. We need to carry people with us, and we need the government to show kind of a bit more vim and vigor on it. It's not just one other thing. It should be central policy. I know everybody in any policy area says our area should be absolutely central, but this really is. And as Sustain always says, food and farming tie together so many issues and are so kind of crucial to people. They're also crucial to nature and climate. So that's the agenda for the coming year. I'm not sure the government quite gets it, but it's our task to make sure they do.
Great, thank you so much for that, John. That was really comprehensive. And you've touched on quite a lot of my questions, so I might have to revisit them as I'm going along. I wonder, could I put something in terms of questions? Sabine, if I could start with you. On Tuesday in Parliament, Therese Coffey told a select committee it's not the role of government to provide free food. And yesterday, Penny Mordaunt, who is the leader of the House of Commons, proudly announced that the proceeds of her book are going to go towards opening some food pantries in her constituency. I was just wondering what your reaction would be to that in terms of like government. It's not government's role to provide free food, and also the promotion of food pantries as a solution.
Yeah, so number one, it's the government's duty to provide people with adequate income for the social security system, and to ensure that employers pay people properly and that they can earn a decent wage. There are duties on the government to provide free food to protected groups, so children. So we'd always advocate for universal free school meals. Older people, disabled people are, that the government is responsible to. But first and foremost, it's the adequacy of income that is this paramount here, without question. In terms of the advocacy around food pantries, I mean, the Trussell Trust and I found are not advocating for ending the need for food banks, so that there's hundreds and hundreds of social supermarkets or food pantries set up. I mean, we're about ending the need for all forms of charitable food aid. And if a social supermarket depends on charity in any form or on surplus food, then it's not sustainable. So I think we can get confused about the utility of surplus food in the equation, to be honest, because actually, if you want to reduce food poverty and the food surplus problem, you need to tackle both problems at their roots. So poverty, and in order to reduce food waste, you need to stop producing the food waste. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound in a little way you kind of agree with Therese Coffey there. It's not the role of government to provide free food. It's the role of government actually.
Well, it depends on to who, yeah. But then on the other hand, someone's in the government's got to take responsibility for ensuring that people have adequacy of income, and that this passing of responsibility between DEFRA and DWP and Treasury and Number 10, there's not a coordinated approach, and we need to put income at the heart of the response and take on responsibilities for certain groups, and ensure that this support is put into law and acted on. Yeah. So adequate wages and adequate benefits first, rather than coming at it from the perspective of free food. Thank you for that, Sabine. Kat, you talked us through what was happening tomorrow about government kicking the advertising regulations into the long grass, the watershed, and the online advertising ban of junk food. I wonder, could we just take a little step back and look at it from a slightly different perspective of, rather than one policy, all of them. They used to have an obesity strategy that was trumpeted, and it does feel like they went out about the first one, felt quite strong, and ever since it's been sliding back. Have you got any sense of what's happening in government on the obesity strategy, on the targets? Are they still a priority? And if not, who do you think is lobbying against them, and why?
Sure. So in short answer, no, I don't think it's a priority. I suspect Rishi probably would be vaguely supportive of the childhood obesity strategy, but I don't think it's even reached his desk quite yet. Certainly, we've been trying to get a commitment out of him to recommit to the halving childhood obesity by 2030 stat, and haven't had anything back on that. What concerns me more is the lack of support from the Secretary of State of Health, Steve Barclay, who has had a couple of opportunities to really mention prevention and public health alongside work in the NHS. So you saw last week 20 million, I think it was announced, to look at some new research and some new apps. That's great. just needed to say, alongside work going on in prevention, and really there's been no signal otherwise from him or from Neil O'Brien, the shadow, as well. So no, we haven't had any positive signs. I mean, I'm even hearing to be wary of using terms such as prevention and public health when we should be using things like improvement or incentivizing food industry to change. These are not words we want to hear, and they don't help us. So I think that probably tells us a lot about who they're listening to. And we know the big trade bodies are one, and we know these dark money funded think tanks are another group that have been very powerful, and they will use economic arguments that really don't stand up to scrutiny. As someone said earlier, you know, the idea of getting rid of these policies is really economic illiteracy. So that's who we know they're listening to. We're hoping that we'll just make as noise as we can, and really it's a case of making a case for showing that, you know, we don't stand for this kind of thing, and looking further down the line, looking for commitment for another government that might come in and be able to make further commitments. So it's not saying that it's lost for now. There's a lot of work that can be done between now and the next government, whoever it may be. But certainly these legislations, that feels like it was the last shot.
Okay, thank you for that. Sean, I'm going to come to you now. There was a report published earlier this year that showed that oil and gas prices, and particularly fertilizer prices, artificial fertilizers, which we're not necessarily fans of, but increases in prices in that, plus the impact of climate, is already having an impact on what UK households are having to pay for their food. So I'm wondering what the Green Alliance would say, you know, to people who said, look, we can't focus on climate at the moment. We're just too busy, you know, trying to get through this cost of living crisis at the moment. You know, we'll worry about climate at a later stage. What would be your response to that? What would you say to people who thought that that was possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously politics have changed totally. Everything will now be seen through the lens of the cost of living, and rightly so. And I think we need to, you know, through Warm This Winter, Green Alliance, which has not really, it's been a kind of relatively techie climate think tank over the years, is making common cause with Save the Children and Age UK and others, and actually supporting, kind of saying you need to do this through the benefit system and increase payments to people. What we've been really keen to see off is the idea that there's some sort of competition or choice you have to make between acting on net zero, nature sensitive farming, etc., and addressing the cost of living crisis. So there was an argument earlier this year: we can't afford the farming reforms. We need to plough up every bit of, you know, every acre of land and plant it, and ignoring the fact that we grow a whole lot of biofuels. Between the UK, the US, and the EU, we have produce twice as much grain for biofuels as is produced in the whole of Ukraine. As Sustain knows very well, kind of an awful lot of the grain we grow is fed directly to animals. I think it's 50% in the UK, 80% of the US. So there are choices to be made here, but it's not a choice between environmental policies and protecting the future, protecting future generations, and protecting people this winter and through the cost of living crisis. That is a false choice. And if I may just sort of end, I'm slightly wary, you said my remarks were very comprehensive earlier, which means too long. But the other thing which should kind of give us hope is that when Liz Truss government was having this so-called attack on nature, hashtag attack on nature, what we saw was a fantastic mobilization of a quite radical mobilization of the big and traditionally quite conservative conservation groups, RSPB, but fully backed by National Trust, Wildlife Trust, etc., and the sort of wider group, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, etc., saying enough is enough. This is an attack on nature. Back off. And that had a big impact. And they weren't altogether pleased with this, but it did have an impact on Conservative MPs' attitudes. They got a lot of letters, and throughout it all, we've seen that public support for climate action has held up. This is now kind of regularly a top 2, 3, 4 issue in opinion polls, and it polls well in focus groups across demographics, red wall seats, blue wall seats, or whatever. So obviously we've got to keep that, but that's quite a powerful platform to build from.
Okay, thank you for that. There is a question in the Q&A actually about the retained EU legislation bill, which might be getting into a bit too much detail for some people who are here today. But do you want to say something very briefly about that, Sean, and what we should all be on the lookout for in 2023? Do you think it's going to happen? Are they actually going to sunset all of our environmental protections? And
yeah, I mean, this is the triumph of ideology over anything remotely sensible. So the government is committed to reviewing, reforming, or scrapping all EU law by the end of 2023, all retained EU law. They don't know how much there is. We keep finding new. We used to say 700 pieces of law, as it were, owned by DEFRA. It's now much more than that. Nobody wants it. Businesses against it, unions are against it, consumer groups are against it, environmental groups are against it. It has almost no supporters except anti-EU ideologues desperate to find the Brexit dividend. So I think the government is, I'm afraid, keeping with it for internal party management reasons. But they should be thoroughly embarrassed by it, because it's going to help nobody, and it's tying up a lot of time. But there is a very good coalition, a very big, broad-based coalition of all these sectors, surprising friends, and it's really hard to find anybody who thinks this is anything other than bonkers.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so Sean, from your perspective, we have to look out for the retained EU law bill next year because it's bonkers, and also to look out for your report, your land use report that's coming, because I think Therese Coffey said the land use framework was going to be published in the first 6 months. Kat, thank you for rallying the troops. Everybody has to look out for what the government is up to on trying to delay the advertising regulation. So please do join us in trying to fight off those plans. Sabine, we've got a minute or two left. Could I just hand over to you, please, for a final word? And if I could ask you the question, what can we do to help? Because it's Christmas and we're always encouraged to, you know, to turn up somewhere and with gifts or with food, but I'm not sure that that's what you would say we should be doing. What's your message to people on the call as funders and donors? What should we do to help?
Yeah, thanks so much, Orla. I mean, our message really is, you know, absolutely we need help, food banks need help, but we can change the way we help, and that can help push the agenda along, the cash first approach to food insecurity agenda. So, you know, giving donations, financial donations is really helpful to food banks, because then they can diversify how they support people. They can give out vouchers, they can even give out vouchers to agencies who are referring people to their help and take themselves out of the equation. But we also ask that simultaneously that people write to their MPs, that they take action, that there's this joined up approach to filling the gap, but also trying to close it at the same time. Because we're not, you know, we're in a kind of treading water situation where we're constantly filling the gap, and then it gets wider, then it might close a little bit, then it gets wider, and we need to address this for the long term. We need to ensure that, you know, we have a long-term approach to this, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel despite the bleakness of this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna finish it there because we're right at the end of our slot. Thank you so much to the people who put questions in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. If our panelists have time to look at the Q&A, and if you can answer any of them, I think there's a few technical ones for you, Sean. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up, and we will put, Sabine, I'm not sure that you mentioned you have an MP action at the moment, and we will put a link to that into the chat. I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Sabine and Sean. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you so much to everybody for your input there. As you said, very sobering, Orla. We're going to take a short break now, and during the break, we'll be sharing a slideshow illustrating some of Sustain's achievements over the past year, working together with the Alliance members and many others. And if you'd like to be part of what we do, if you see something there that inspires you, then please do get in touch, because we love to work together with people to make change happen. So I'll ask you to come back at 3:30, stretch your legs, have a cup of tea, do whatever you need to do. We'll see you back here at 3:30. Thank you very much. It's 3:30 and I'm just calling the conference back into session. If people want to join us again, you're most welcome to join us back at the Sustain Annual Conference 2022. You'll have seen during the break that we were scrolling through some infographics on some of the things that we've achieved over the last year. We do like to take a little retrospective like that because sometimes it's hard to realize that we've all made progress together, and we really have. We keep on chipping away at these problems bit by bit over time, whilst always keeping our eye on the long game as well. And sometimes I like to remind ourselves that we all last much longer than many governments that we have seen over recent months. I normally say years, but it's actually only been months and several governments in. So welcome back. The next session in our annual conference is about policy solutions. As I said in my opening comments at the start of the conference, Sustain is an alliance, and we work together for a better system of food and farming. So it's very important that we now give the stage to people in our movement who are championing policy solutions. These can help to manage the immediate cost of living crisis, as Sabine so rightly drew our attention to in the last session, whilst also building the foundations for good policy making for the future. We don't want to be continuously trying to firefight with the same problems forever. We need to keep in mind both the short-term crisis, but also what we're continuing to try and achieve together in the longer term. So, turning to our guest speakers, who will be on screen very shortly, I just want to remind you each that you each have just 5 minutes. So please don't be offended if I jump in and cut you off. I just need to keep the session to time. And I've got a very, very high-tech way of showing you if your time's nearly up, which is this. I'm not entirely sure that will show on screen, but we'll give it a go. I do like old-fashioned technology. So first, please let me welcome to the stage, let me go to my piece of paper, Liv Evren, who is an anti-poverty and social mobility campaigner. And also, I understand, coming to the stage, the virtual stage, with Barbara Crowther, who is our children's food campaigner. Very much welcome to you, Liz. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you would like us to hear?
So, hello, for those of you who don't know me, which I doubt will be quite a few of you. My name's Liv Evren, and I'm one of the youth ambassadors for the End Child Poverty Coalition, which I'm pretty sure many of you watching at home might be a part of. So as part of my role as youth ambassador, I use some of my lived experience to really call for change. So a lot of what we do is around free school meals, around the cost of living crisis. We've recently just released our report around 16 to 25-year-olds opinions round. Oh, hello. We've just released We're Skin, which is our report around the cost of living crisis, which is by young people for young people. But mainly what I'm here to talk about today is free school meals and my lived experience of free school meals. So I was very fortunate to go to a primary school in which every single member of my class but one was on free school meals. And they were really important in my life. It was the one constant meal that I had every day, in school time anyway. I really appreciated how diverse the meals were and how it wasn't just beans and chips or, not particularly great. I never ever felt judgment because we were all on them, bar one. But I've also got experience of not being on free school meals whilst at secondary school, and sort of, the the questionable packed lunches which are scraped together by my poor mum. I'm mindful that my experiences of growing up in poverty 8 years ago, because I'm 19 now, would you believe, are much different to those of young people who are growing up now in Halton. But something that I can relate to is the isolating feeling of, not having a lunch some days, or just having, a bizarre lunch compared to that of my peers. And I think now is a time where quite a lot of us are feeling quite tired and disenfranchised and just fed up with the multiple governments that we've been having, the change of ministers, and like the just a lack of consistency, and policy initiatives have been binned off. But we're in a cost of living crisis, and it's going to get so challenging for families. I mean, I think about my experiences, and how I thought that, for quite a lot of the time, it was sort of the end of the world, and how, just how challenging it was, when in reality, I had it really easy compared to some of the families now. And quite a lot of the work that the coalition has been doing, sometimes I do think, well, this is challenging, this is making me reflect on some experiences that, I didn't really want to reflect on. But a huge part of the work that I do with the coalition as well is learning about how young people are coping today and sort of some of the sacrifices that families are making. And that is a real motivator for me, because, I look back at my experiences and how challenging they were, but they're really, really hard. They're really hard now. And I hope that some of the charity leaders or, politicians, MPs, whoever you are, who was part of this webinar can, reflect on some of the experiences that I share with you perhaps later on, and just feel re-energized to really get back to campaign and really have a united front, because free school meals are a foundation. It's a short-term problem it's a long-term solution to a short-term problem, and it's something that we can all really, really get behind. So I hope I've used my 5 minutes wisely, and I'm looking forward to contribute more later on.
Thanks, Liv. I think it's really, really important that we always start this conversation by hearing from young people who have got that experience. And I think what we hear from young people is that this is not just about providing food to stop children going hungry. This is about their educational experience. It's about the ability to concentrate and learn in class. So Sustain and the Children's Food Campaign, we've been part of the Feed the Future initiative that's been calling for a universal vision of free school meals for all children, and that's from nursery. No, we often kind of go upwards, but we're saying it should start with nursery and go all the way through. Clearly that can't be achieved overnight, so the first priority must be to close the gap for children who most need those meals, and that's why there's been a focus on changing the threshold on universal credit. But we know that actually universal school meals are way more effective in increasing uptake for all children, including those previously eligible, because they remove all those bureaucratic and stigma involving barriers. They're the most economically productive, in that a recent report from PwC has estimated for every £1 invested in school meals, £1.71 would be returned through a universal approach. And just yesterday, Westminster Council became the 5th council in London to say they're rolling out universal school meals to all primary school children. And it's been a while since we had that kind of announcement. Most recently, Croatia became the latest country to announce a universal approach. We've got states in the US rolling out universal approach. Finland has been doing it for decades, since the end of the Second World War, and has shown the economic benefit of that program. So we are pretty much fed up with the government saying no to children and no to young people, and citing cost of living and taxpayer responsibilities. We do not means test prisoners in prisons. We do not means test people in hospital in order to get a meal, yet we choose to subject children to means testing in the middle of the day. So come the new year, Sustain Children's Food Campaign, along with partners, we're going to be launching a new campaign called Say Yes to School Meals for All. And it's going to be a positive campaign about the schools for the future that we want, schools in which food is at the heart of a whole school food approach. All children receive the same opportunities to enjoy and sit down to eat together. We think it can be achieved. It takes vision. Other countries are achieving it. I don't see why we can't in the UK.
In my entirely neutral role as chair, can I say 3 cheers for you? Fantastic. And thank you so much to Liv and Barbara for that fantastic policy solution. I'm in. The next speaker we invite to our virtual stage is Olusei Obadari, who's a public health project manager from Medway Council. Olu, can I hand over the stage to you?
Thank you very much, Kat, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak at the annual conference today. My sincere appreciation to the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive, Ben, who was able to attend our second annual partnership event here in Medway. And thank you very much, Liv and Barbara, for that wonderful presentation. And following up from that, I've been asked to speak about the Medway Food Partnership response to tackling food poverty in the community. My name is Olu, and like Kat mentioned, I work for Medway Council, and I also co-chair the Medway Food Partnership. Next slide, please. So the Medway Food Partnership was established in 2020, and the vision was to create an environment that supports sustainable access of healthy food, skills, and education for all. More importantly, is to build healthier communities and better future for everyone in Medway. And as you can see, we had our second annual partnership event last month, which was attended by over 80 partners across Medway, including our guests and speakers from Sustain, the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, and from the universities across Medway as well. Next slide, please. And the Medway Food Partnership, in a nutshell, is a collaborative network of local businesses, not-for-profit sector organizations, and members of the community working together to create and to impact the vision that we've created for the Medway Food Partnership. And more importantly, we have 5 subgroups. Subgroup 1 focuses on food poverty, food security. 2 focuses on the healthy food for all and education and skills. We have our 3rd subgroup focusing on climate change, business procurement, and oral health. But my speech would be focusing on the subgroup 1, which again is just focusing on food poverty, as I've been asked to speak. Next slide. In 2021, which was last year, again, before even the cost of living crisis came into being, and at our first annual event, Fair Share Kent shared a staggering statistics that an estimate of 90,000 children across Kent and Medway go to school hungry, and the same number of children go to bed hungry. And this is in Kent and Medway, not a country in Africa or other continents. I mean, here in England, and we've heard so much about the work of food banks today. And without doubt, this will be similar figures in other regions. And so what were we able to do? Next slide. Our approach to tackling food poverty in the community was to bring together all charitable organizations. And as you can see from the screen, we were able to address this issue. We created a spreadsheet with details of all our partners. And what this meant was residents across Medway were aware of local food charities, food banks that were available to them from Monday up until Sunday. Again, this information was made available on the webpage, even with Medway Council, in addition to the Medway Household Support Fund. And we were also able to promote this information through schools, children's hub, and centers across Medway. Next slide. And as you can see from our approach in 2020, we were able to reach out to 7,654 families in Christmas compared to 2021, 16,357. And as you can see from the statistics from Fair Share last year, 90,000 children. We are just scratching the surface. This year alone, we've just been able to reach out to 16,976 households on a monthly basis, just in Medway. And as you know, with the cost of living crisis, that number definitely increasing. And if you go to the next slide, please. And regarding the Healthy Start vouchers, which again I'll touch on, this aims to improve the health of low-income pregnant women and children under the age of 4. Recent data from the Healthy Start update data by local authority in England from September last year to March this year shows a significant increase in the uptake of these vouchers. Unfortunately, we do not run this scheme in-house. This is something that my team have raised at our infant feeding strategy group with Medway Foundation Trust and Medway Community Healthcare part of the group. We have suggested that we bring Healthy Start into the subgroup 1 of the Medway Food Partnership, which again links with poverty to look at possible actions we can take locally. But at present, the Healthy Start vouchers are promoted to all our member organizations on a regular basis. And my last slide, please. And as you can see,
Olo, just to let you know that we're running out of time. So
yes, this is just my this is my last slide. Yeah, as you can see, just few partners on the Medway Food Partnership, and we've recently received a list of 2,900 food businesses across Medway, and the next stage is to design a plan to engage with these food businesses. Again, one quote that resonates with me, which I always remind all our partners, is the words of Ellen Keeler: "Alone we can do so much, together we are alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much more." So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
And I think everybody can see quite how wonderful enthusiasm you put into it. And if there isn't a food partnership in your area, take inspiration from Olu, because this is what happens when people do stuff together. We get so much done. Thank you so much for your input today, Olu. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to invite now to the stage Sophia Parenti, who's one of my colleagues from the Sustainable Food Places Network, who works for Sustain. And Sophia's going to share stuff on good food enterprise. Thank you very much, Sophia.
Thank you very much. So a lot of focus has been justifiably on impact of cost of living on households, particularly those on the lowest incomes. But fair to say there's been a huge impact on good food enterprises in our networks. So who are we talking about? We're talking about local food here. We're talking about mostly small and medium enterprises that produce and sell locally. So think about your box scheme, farmers selling directly to customers, food hubs aggregating supply, markets, independent shops, bakeries, cafes, restaurants. So all the shops and products that we like to see on our high street and give identity to our high street, to where we live. So why is this important? Well, it all goes back to a diverse supply chain and the importance of having that diversity, like Professor Ha-Joon Chang was talking about. Our food system is incredibly concentrated. 95% of groceries are sold through the top 9 retailers in the UK. So these SMEs, they helped maintain our food supply during COVID. They support small-scale growers, farmers, producers with a route to market. They create jobs, training opportunities, solid social and economic value in the places where we live. They are also likely to produce to higher environmental standards. So we surveyed some of these enterprises in our networks last month, and we got 89 responses back from box schemes, shops, markets, buying groups, food hubs, cooperatives, and they are really worried about the situation now and in the near future. High energy prices, inflation, coupled with a lack of infrastructure, high rents, this is creating a perfect storm at the moment. Most of the enterprises are experiencing reduced sales, difficulty recruiting staff and volunteers. They're already changing ingredients, inputs, menus to cope with the rise in operating costs. And a smaller number are already adjusting opening, closing times and reducing the number of days they are operating. And there's also a sense that the worst of the storm is still to come. In the next 6 months to a year, they're not expecting things to improve. On the contrary, they expect to reduce the number of volunteers and staff, which will have a knock-on impact on local employment and training opportunities. But this is not about doom and gloom. Sustain is about solutions, and that's what we're here for. This is not inevitable. And we ask these enterprises, what are the measures for national government that would have the biggest impact? Most of them are not receiving emergency support of any kind, and some feel that government policy should do more to support SMEs in the food sector. And SMEs are crucial in our sector. They're 78% of all businesses, 26% of employment, 17% of turnover in our sector. So what they would like to see is more investment in local food infrastructure and enterprises through leveling up funding. It's further reduction in energy prices beyond the 6 months of the energy bill relief scheme, emergency funding for SMEs. There's also a sense that there is an unfair competition created by large retailers and the need to create a level playing field. They would like to see national marketing campaign encouraging people to buy from local businesses and from small horticultural enterprises. They should be eligible for agricultural financial support. So plenty we can do in terms of national policy. Local government has a crucial role in here as well. And just running through the number of measures that would help the most. More local promotion of businesses and buy local campaigns. Favorable treatment in the access to land and premises. Financial support, emergency funding. Schemes run by local authorities or large employers, providing vouchers or other incentives to spend on local businesses rather than supermarkets. Investment in local infrastructure, support for buying collectives and shared infrastructure. Grants, support, advice to become more energy efficient, as well as to switch to renewable energy. Encouraging local fruit and veg businesses to accept Healthy Start vouchers. Preferential buying from SMEs by large buyers, such as local employers or public sector procurement. So now is the time to invest. It's a matter of use it or lose it, like our friends in Regatta Cooperative in Sheffield like to say. And just reminding everyone that Sustain has actually estimated that if we grow the market share for local SMEs, food retailers, by 10% or to 10% from the current tiny percentage, this would create an additional 200,000 jobs, good food jobs in this sector. So I will leave you with a quote from one of the responders that encapsulates the feeling. I'll give you a few seconds to read it by yourselves. This is what a lot of food businesses in our networks are feeling right now. So I'll leave you with this and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you,
forward
Sophia.
to the questions.
And can I take this opportunity to say thank you for all that you do to run the Sustainable Food Places Network with the team. Absolutely fantastic. And all of the wonderful partnerships that are working across the country to work with local authorities, with businesses, with policy to make real difference in people's lives. So thank you so much for all of that. And I'm now going to invite to the stage Shefali Loth, who is the principal food writer and researcher at which other people might know as the Consumers Association previously, talking about how to support consumers through the cost of living crisis and beyond. I think your lighting's come on now, Shefali. That's good. And your forest, how marvelous. Welcome, take the stage.
Great. So hi, everyone. As Kath said, I'm Shefali Loth from Which. And at Which we're trying to look at what we can do to support consumers through the cost of living crisis, both behind the scenes and also by giving them actionable advice that they can use. So first of all, on the back of our research, we've launched our Affordable Food for All campaign. So next slide, please. Thank you. We worked with the Consumer Data Research Centre at Leeds University to create a priority places for food index. Now, basically, this ranks areas across the UK on the likelihood of people needing support to feed themselves. And it looks at 7 measures in total, which include proximity to large supermarkets, access to online delivery services, plus it also looks at personal circumstances such as income and access to a car. Now, the index shows that actually in England, the worst impacted area is in the northeast, where 45% of local areas are in dire need of extra support. And this is mainly due to poor access to online supermarket deliveries, a worse than average proximity to supermarkets, and also a higher need for family food support, such as free school meals and Healthy Start vouchers. In the devolved nations, the issues differ slightly. So, for example, in Wales, which is more rural, proximity to supermarkets is a real issue, and so the valleys are more affected. In Scotland, the most affected area is North Ayrshire, and in Northern Ireland, it's East Londonderry. So next slide, please. So on the back of this index, Which has launched our campaign and a 10-point action plan for supermarkets. Now, our asks are based around 3 themes. First of all, clear, fair and transparent pricing so that it's easy for consumers and customers to compare best value. Secondly, we want to see the right products available in the right places for consumers who need them most. So this means providing a basic range of essential budget items and lines across all stores, but especially in the areas that we've identified through the index that people need most support. We're also asking supermarkets to adapt their minimum spend requirements for online deliveries so that they become available to a lot more people. And then our third ask is around marketing budgets and promotions. We're asking that they be tailored to support those most in need. So that might be offering targeted discounts through loyalty cards or promoting the uptake of Healthy Start vouchers and topping them up if possible. And also we want to see a big push on supermarkets offering price reductions over multi-buy offers, that, for example, those that Kat mentioned earlier. So far, we've had more than 48,000 people sign up to support the campaign and ask their supermarkets to take action. We've had numerous councils and NGOs get in touch to ask about using the index for their work. It is publicly available, so everyone can use it. And we launched the campaign in November, so we're currently in the process of meeting with supermarkets to see where we can get their commitment. Now, I want to say that while the outward-facing part of this campaign is very much targeted and focused on supermarkets, we do also believe that the government has a huge role to play here, and so we are working with them as well. So that's the kind of campaigning work that we're doing, but also very quickly, I just want to tell you about the work that we're doing at the moment to give consumers actionable advice. And we have, next slide. Oh, 2 next slides, please. I forgot to ask you to move on. Yeah. So on our website, we have a cost of living hub where consumers can go to get free advice on reducing their energy bills. They can find information on tax credits and benefits that they might be entitled to, advice on dealing with debt, but also what to do and who to contact if they're struggling. But in this area, we also have advice on food and retail. So next slide, please. First of all, we have our cheapest supermarket basket, where each month we compare the cost of groceries at all the major supermarkets to find out which is cheapest. We do a trolley of around 150 items. And then we have a smaller basket of around 50 items, which allows us to include the discounters in the analysis. Next slide, please.
I just need you to draw to a close fairly shortly, Shefali.
Sure.
Thank you.
And then this week we've launched a food inflation tracker, which basically looks and tracks the cost of hundreds of thousands of foods across the 8 supermarkets. You'll see a link in the chat, so you can go and have a look at the themes here. But basically, we found that budget ranges have gone up more in price compared to premium ranges and branded goods in supermarkets. So those who need it the most are suffering the most. And then final piece of content, and next slide, please, is some work we've done this week, just looking at the cost of actual cooking, because our consumer insight shows us that now 18% of people told us they're having fewer cooked meals because they're worried about the cost of actually cooking. So we've done this to look at how much it costs to cook different foods via different methods to try and give people advice on how they can cook most economically.
Thank you so much. And I think you've illustrated beautifully how important it is that we have the data and the really in exposure of what's really going on for people at a local level. But I'm sure lots of people will find that incredibly useful. Thank you so much, Shefali. I'm now going to invite to the stage Vicky Hurd, who is the head of sustainable farming campaign at Sustain, talking about fairness in the food supply chain. Because it's all very well as talking about cheap food in a survey, but obviously that has an impact also on incomes. So and in the supply chain and for farmers. So handing over to you, Vicky.
Thank you very much, Kat. I'll try and be brief. Yes, I work on farming and supply chain issues. Can we, stay on this slide for now, the previous slide. I have worked on supply chain fairness for a long time. And the reason for that is because there is an incredible imbalance of power between those producing our food, be they here, the farmers and the workers in the food system, or overseas where 40% of our food comes. There's incredible imbalanced power. If you can imagine an hourglass with the farmers at the top producing the food and us, you know, with a large number of hundreds of thousands of farmers and consumers at the bottom of the hourglass buying it. And we've learned a lot about consumers and the troubles they're in now. The bit in the middle, the tiny bit in the middle is a handful of buyers and a handful of companies who dictate the price of the food, how food is produced, because what they do actually determines what farmers can do in terms of transitioning to agroecological systems, which we urgently need to do for the nature and climate crisis. No question, we need to do that everywhere. So they dictate the prices and the ability of farmers to change, also to pay their workers and to treat their animals and to treat their land well, so that we can actually feed ourselves in the future. That's absolutely critical. And I've been working on fairness for a long time because I was hearing time and time again from overseas and from here, farmers can't do what we need them to do. They can't stop using the chemicals, the fertilizers, the pesticides. They can't diversify their production systems, have more rotations, because the market will not pay. There is no market for what they can produce, or the market demands standards like perfectly sized carrots, beautiful apples, etc., etc. The market is a big part of the problem. Now, I will also, with my colleague James, work a lot on public support for farming, and that's a really critical part of the debate, because we need to be supporting farming systems everywhere to deliver public goods like clean air, clean water, those kind of things that the market will never really pay for. But it's very hard if one side of the system, the public support, there isn't enough budget there and it's not good enough, and there's a lot of problems that I could talk for hours on in terms of the UK government's environmental land schemes, etc., and globally. But here I am to talk about the other part of the money that farmers need to deliver what we need, and that is the market. And they are squeezed, and they have been squeezed for decades. And we campaigned for a grocery code adjudicator many years ago, which has some control over how the top 13 supermarkets, including Amazon, but all those Tesco's, Sainsbury's, etc., how they treat farmers. But it doesn't cover the bit in between, and it's not really good enough anyway, and it's at threat. There is a current consultation which suggests that the government is minded to abolish it or merge it with the Competition and Markets Authority, which would weaken it. Lots of problems there, lots of things the government can do. And why do they need to do it? Next slide, please. This is a graphic from a report we brought out last week. It's just one of the graphics. We had a fantastic pair of researchers, a professor of accountancy, no less, delving deep into data, aggregated data from the food system on where the money goes in the supply chain. And you can see from this, there's a lot of costs in the supply chain. And the professor was very keen to examine those costs because it's a very extractive chain. Loads of money going for transport, for processing, for packaging, for storage, all sorts of things, and for marketing and advertising, which we couldn't even include. Loads of extractive costs. And then there's a tiny little slice of profit at the end. When you look at that tiny slice of profit, you can see the farmer gets crumbs. And it's a great graphic by my colleague Alan. There's the crumbs there. Is that enough for the farmer to really grow the kind of wheat and the other products? There's 5 other products we looked in detail. Please do look at the report. Is that enough for them to have a living, pay their workers, treat their animals properly? We also looked at cheddar, and do the transition to agroecological farming, which does mean costs. It means changing. It means new approach, new machinery, etc. No, it's not. And you can see a lot of our the detail in the report and what our demands are. The next slide, please. Echo with what Sophia, for instance, was saying earlier, building better routes to market for farmers. We absolutely need to invest in new and shorter and farmer-focused supply chains, better food traders, and the investment that means that farmers can actually do their processing of their products, sorting their products, marketing a product, food hubs and all sorts of things to provide a product at an affordable price without all that extractive costs in the middle to consumers. That's what we want. We want that bridging the gap process so that farmers can actually access consumers far more closely. So that's building better in markets. We also need better regulation. We need to keep the Groceries Code adjudicator, and I'm very pleased to be able to tell you today we've got a meeting in the new year with the minister in charge of this at BASE. So that's a bit of good news. I hope it means that they're going to keep it, but we need supply chain codes of practice legally enforced and monitored. And then finally, more transparency in the supply chain. Oh, I also should say dynamic procurement of public food for public canteens like schools and hospitals, sourcing from SMEs, sourcing from farmers. So we've got that diversity, but also more transparency and mandatory reporting, acknowledging the huge overheads and measuring them and trying to bring them down. I will leave it there. Thank you, Kath.
Absolutely fantastic. And you won't have seen in the chat, but various people saying they heard you on the news, Vicky, because you've been doing a brilliant job of campaigning on these things for so long. People are listening. It's fantastic that you're doing this, and also revealing just what little return that farmers get for their wonderful work. So I'm now going to hand the stage to our good friend Pete Ritchie, who's the director at Nourish Scotland, talking about the Good Food Nation Bill and the Healthy Basket Guarantee. It's so nice to see you, Pete. I don't know if you were here at the beginning when I said that the work you do in Scotland is one of my beacons of hope. So it's lovely to welcome you to the stage.
Thanks, Kath. I have no slides, so you just have to rely on my words. Emily said earlier in the chat, it's also damn complicated, and that's absolutely right, because what we're trying to do here is join up food policy, and we're trying to connect the issues Sean was talking about with issues that Sabine was talking about, with issues that Catherine was talking about. You know, all these different issues have to connect with each other. And that's the good news about the Good Food Nation Bill in Scotland. We finally got, the Scottish Government has taken its responsibility to sort out the food system. Now, it hasn't done it yet. It hasn't done it, but it's taken a responsibility. And that's a million miles away from Therese Coffey. And to some extent, actually, from the National Food Strategy in England, where affordability of food was sort of ruled pretty much out of scope from the beginning. Whereas I think what's happened in Scottish Government is that there's now a collective understanding that to sort the food system out, it has to be available and accessible to people. It has to be healthy, it has to be sustainable, and farmers have to make a living. And in shorthand terms, that's the right to food. And we have to, you know, the right to food is a really useful explanatory tool for thinking about all this stuff together rather than one bit at a time. The right to food isn't in the Good Food Nation Bill sort of as a incorporated right. That's going to come next year in the Human Rights Bill in Scotland, which will incorporate the entire Economic, Social, Cultural Covenant. It's going to take a long time to deliver on that, but the fundamental principle of the right to food will be in Scots law within about 18 months. So that is good news. But it referred to in the Good Food Nation Bill. And what the bill requires is that national government has to produce a cross-cutting food plan. It says what areas it has to cover. It has to bring that to Parliament, get that through Parliament, 60 days consideration in Parliament. It also has to consult with people widely on doing that, and then local authorities and health boards all have to make their cross-cutting food plans. So that's like built into the law. It's not an option, or we could do it, we don't have to do it, or we could do it and then we could scrap it. And the other thing is there's an independent food commission. And again, how good that's going to be, how effective it's going to be in holding governments to account, keeping its feet to the fire, we'll just have to wait and see. But at least it's the beginnings of sorting out a system. But in terms of the right to food, as people have said, as has been said earlier on, we have to focus on cash first approach, and that has been absolutely clear with Scottish Government for the last few years. So they've introduced things like the Scottish Child Payment, £25 a week for a child under 16, if you're on certain benefits. They've integrated that with Best Start Foods and Best Start Grant, with some paternity grant, so that there's more help available for families. And obviously on universal free school meals, we're now P1 to P5, P6 and 7 should be next year, but SNP Conference has commitment to extend that to secondary schools. So that's not there yet, but it's coming down the track. So, and it's certainly, as somebody asked a question earlier on about preschool, early learning and childcare, it's already built into that. So there is a sort of, beginnings of universal coverage there. And I think a genuine interest in trying to make the food that we procure for those preschool meals both more sustainable and more local and get a better return for farmers. So we're not there yet, but at least these agendas are being joined up and they're being seen as part of one agenda. Sorry about the collie dog. She's very keen to join in with it. She has nothing to say on this subject, I'm afraid. So, but I think people were expressing things earlier, but the thing about cash first. And it's really important to say that what cash first means in Scotland is things going through Social Security Scotland. And that's a fundamentally different approach to welfare payments. We've been really lucky to be able to start a new social security agency, which under the new act says social security is an investment in the people of Scotland. You know, so it's a very different value set to start with in why we're doing social security. And 2,000 people were involved in setting up the agency who used existing benefits to give feedback on how did those benefits work? Did they work well? Didn't they work well? How could they be improved? No, I'm not saying at the beginning it's perfect. What I'm trying to say is it's a different relationship between the state and citizens. And that's the fundamental thing that is central to this rethinking the food system, is what can you expect as a citizen in the UK? And at the moment, we have a two-tier system, which says if you don't have enough money, you can pick up, you know, the charitable side of this food system. And speaker after speaker this afternoon says that's not good enough. So that change we need to make, and we need a new narrative. Emily says in her thing, another government is possible. Another government will be coming down the track soon, and it's vital that we get the narrative right. I have so many more things to say, but I don't have time to say them. On the Healthy Basket Guarantee, picking up Which's research, we've been tracking with some families about what's a decent way of getting through the week on food and putting together shopping basket menu things. And exactly as Which says, what we've seen is price of bread going up by 50% in that period. Now, how much the price of wheat has gone up, as you can see from Vicky's graphic, that's not accounting for a 50% increase in the price of bread. Somebody somewhere is making some money out of this system, and it's not the families who have to buy bread every week. So I think on that note, the Healthy Basket Guarantee has to be about everybody being entitled to live and eat healthily without screwing the farmers. Is that my minute up? Thank you, Kath.
Thank you so much, Pete. How wonderful to hear from you. Beacons of hope alight and alive in the Good Food Nation bill. I'm calling my colleagues from throughout this panel to the screen. We don't have a lot of time left, just a few minutes, but I noticed in the Q&As that Daniel Zeichner is here, who is Labour front bench, and he put in a question saying, what would we like to say to the shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer? But I'll go so far as to say, what do we want to say to whoever is the next Chancellor of the Exchequer? What should we be saying about our economy, our fiscal policy that would help to make things better? Whoever jumps in first gets to say their first idea. Keep it brief because we'd like to hear 2 or 3.
Reread the Beveridge report.
Reread the Beveridge report. Good one. If people haven't heard about that, do you want to summarize that very quickly?
Sure. 1942, a bigger economic crisis we have now. What that did is look 30 years ahead, and it looked at what would it take for everybody to live without want or hunger. And it actually looked at what was the actual cost of living decently in 1942. How much would that cost? Could the government afford it? Yes, it could. And the idea that 80 years later, we live in a country where we don't think we can manage to give people a warm house, enough energy, you know, mobility and decent food. It's crazy that we're back here 80 years on from the Beveridge report.
It certainly is. Who else would like to come with an intervention on this front? We've got the Chancellor in front of us. What do we say to them? Vicky?
Definitely the measures to stop the extractive supply chain. There's so much money taken out and lying elsewhere in shareholder dividends or in high executive salaries, offshore tax havens, but also the fossil fuel industry. You know, the huge rise in energy prices is causing a lot of problems right now. Just to say that the data for our work was taken from before March. So it shows that it's probably far worse if we took the data from now in terms of what farmers get, where all the money goes. So it's, you know, it's been a long-standing problem, as Pete knows. We should be sorting it out by having more distribution of the value of food correctly done through proper regulation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come to Liv. You've got your hand up.
I feel like I'm at school again.
Sorry.
No, it's sound. Investing in our young people is investing in universal free school meals. It's going to be a horrendous winter for so many families, young people across the country. And investing in universal free school meals is going to be the backbone of getting people through a horrible, horrible winter. And it's just I don't know, it's something that would really support many, many families. And I can't believe that it's not been introduced sooner.
Thank you so much, Liv, and for joining us today to make that point so clearly and powerfully. Barbara, you had your hand up while Liv was speaking. Do you want to come in?
Totally back what Liv is saying. I think we have suffered under 3-4 years of a government that just keeps saying no to investing in children and young people. We need to stop, a Labour government should stop means testing children when it gets to the lunch break at school. They should treat food in school like they treat books, desks, chairs, bathrooms, and teachers.
Thank you so much. Sophia.
I would say that we need to recognize that development can be done through investment in local food infrastructure and local food enterprises. And just linking up with another question in the Q&A, whether we should be talking about a food bill rather than spreading too thinly. As a program, Sustainable Food Places has the ambition to see a food bill in every nation and support for a food partnership and food plan in every local area. And this should be the business of every government minister.
Thank you so much. I'm on your gang. I'd like that one as well, please. Olu, you'd like to come in?
Yes, I would just in line with what everyone has said, I would wish to say we need to listen more to the collection of all these organizations. A lot of policies has been developed, a lot of organizations have petitioned the government, and it seems nothing is actually happening. We've got the National Food Strategy, we've got loads of advice and recommendation we've put forward, organization has put forward. So I think it would be a time to listen more to these organizations rather than reinventing the wheel. Thank you.
Fantastic. Let's send them a pair of ears and tell them what they need to hear. Shefali, you haven't spoken. Do you want the chance to?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not sure I could do anything quite as well as Liv did, but actually, I just wanted to basically mirror what everyone else said and say we have got so much evidence, really, and it's just so frustrating. I've been working in public health, well, for a long time now, and it's so depressing that we just are still talking about the same issues, and the government make these incredible plans and then renege on them, and then we're back to square one. And so it would be really nice to see some of the policies that have been planned to actually be implemented and seen through.
I loved the quote at the beginning of our conference when the professor of the economics said we should perhaps be getting a lot angrier and more shouty. And I think maybe with messages tailored to different audiences, but there is something in this virtual room together during this conference which really feels like we need to galvanize around some things and say, actually, as somebody else said during this conference, enough is enough. Children should not be going hungry, as you said, Liv. We will endeavour to come behind campaigns together as an alliance. I'm going to say thank you to you all for you wonderfully sharing your policy solutions and demonstrating what's possible. I'm now going to call this session to a close and move to inviting Sheila Dillon to chair the next session, which will be about talking about politics. And we have got political panelists. And I just wanted to say, Sheila, I haven't actually seen you in person since before COVID. Isn't that ridiculous? It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. So I'm going to determine that's going to be my New Year's resolution to fix that. But over to you to host the next session. I'll come in a few minutes before 5 o'clock just to wrap up the conference. We're heading towards that way. But thank you so much, wonderful Sheila Dillon, for chairing our next session about the politics of food.
Thanks, Kath. Well, this session is going to answer the question, what actions can MPs take to help build a better food and farming system, tackle hunger and ensure that progress is not derailed by current crises, which we have a lot of currently. We were going to have 4 MPs, but sadly Peter Wishart from the SNP has had to drop out. So we're delighted to welcome Daniel Zeichner, who's the Shadow Minister of Labour for DEFRA, Joe Gideon, spokesperson for the Conservatives, and Munira Wilson, MP, spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats. And my first question really to all 3 of you is, it's a part statement, I'd like your comments on this really. I mean, the food system, as if you've been following what's been going on today, is flashing red right now. You know, river pollution, the egg shortage, farmers getting as little as 1p in the pound that shoppers pay for food, children and their parents going hungry, and the NHS threatened by the multi-billion-pound cost of diseases, mostly caused by poor diet. rising out of poverty. And I'm thinking particularly of type 2 diabetes. And I think the latest figure is £14 billion. These issues cross departmental lines, DEFRA, education, health. And it just seems that the government and the opposition need to join the dots. How are you going to do that? Daniel, let's begin with you.
Well, thank you, Sheila, and good afternoon, everybody. And you are absolutely right to make that point. And I think this is something that has bedeviled food policy for a long, long time. I've been Shadow Food Minister for the last 3 years, for much of the time shadowing Victoria Prentice in that role. And my sense throughout was that the role of Food Minister or Shadow did not have the heft and clout that was needed to drive through the kind of changes that many people on this call would like to see. And I think that was most evident in the response to Henry Dimbleby's National Food Plan, because I think a lot of people, myself included, were very excited by a lot of the conclusions that he came to, but it very quickly got swallowed up by the Downing Street machine. And when you look at the response that came back from government many months later, it was a pale imitation of what I think many of us hope to see. But that fundamental question you ask is a structure of government question. And I can't offer you an answer to that at the moment, because I think that is something which we've got to discuss further within my party. But the point I'm making consistently is that those great challenges that Henry Dimbleby laid down, that while the food system may well be in economic terms efficient, it is environmentally very damaging, and it is also causing huge problems to our health. Now, if you could get a system of government right which was able to capture those potential savings from the health service, then you would be in a very good position to do a lot of the things that we would like to see done now. But I genuinely think the last Labour government was closer to that. I think the fact that there was a food plan in place back in 2010 that Hilary Benn and Gordon Brown were actually working on, I think shows it can be done, but that's going to have to be done again. Okay.
I mean, I think historically the Labour governments have not covered themselves with glory when it comes to food and farming. There are historical reasons for that. You know, that's not the roots of the Labour Party. But anyway, we'll come back to you on that. Joe Gideon, you, I assume, take a rather different view to Daniel. You know, you don't see the number 10 as a machine eating up good ideas, but you know, there was such a gap between Henry Dimbleby's National Food Strategy and what the government then came out with, which was not embedded anyway in legislation. It's just targets. So what's your view of my long point a few minutes ago?
Well, no, so you're not correct in your assumption that I will disagree with Daniel on all things. I'm somewhat of an outlier in the Conservative Party and a backbencher, so I've been quite vocal about the lack of uptake of Henry Dimbleby's excellent recommendations in the National Food Strategy. In fact, I think I'm the first MP ever to host a food summit with Henry Dimbleby opening it in Stoke-on-Trent, looking at the entire food system from field to fork. So I'm fully behind the need to have better food, better farming for better lives. And I think that, you know, and part of Henry's recommendations were that this has to be a cross-departmental, you know, there has to be some form of task force with teeth, if you like, that looks at it in every department, because you cannot deliver, you know, the environmental improvements, the health improvements, and, you know, it goes to business as well, and, you know, things like labelling and the advertising things, the obesity strategy. These are all things that have to be looked at in the round, and that's why I pulled everybody together. I'm not typical of my party, and I have also called for a good food bill. So I will continue fighting a somewhat lonely fight on this, because I think it's massively important.
Are you optimistic about that? Because Theresa Coffey, as you know, is completely uninterested in the point of view that you're putting forward.
Yes, so I'm not entirely optimistic at this moment in time. I think that, and I've said this, that we have to sort of reframe things in such a way that people will be interested. And I think for me, the key thing is I framed it in terms of levelling up. I represent a red wall seat where we have high levels of deprivation and educational underattainment and large numbers of people on long-term sick due to health issues. Surely, health and food is a fundamental part of good health, must be considered, in all departments. When we're talking levelling up, you can't level up a child's educational attainment if they go to school hungry, or if the school meals that they have are not nourishing.
Right. Okay, Munira, speaking for the Lib Dems, I mean, you are one of these, your education, that we long for you to, if you get into government, we long for you to join up with DEFRA and health.
Yes, so first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak. Unlike other panelists, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm very much here in my education brief and given my campaign on free school meals, but I'd say broadly, similar things actually to both Daniel and Joe, in that, as a party, we very much welcome Dimbleby's report and some of his, very thoughtful and strong recommendations. Also disappointed with the government's response. We feel that farmers in particular are really being let down at the moment, and we are keen to champion local produce and British farmers who farm to very high standards. And really want to use the public procurement system, not least through schools and school meals, to really support local farmers with, who produce good food to really high standards. We know that food that's produced further away is often done to lower standards, and British farmers are being undercut really through trade deals. So we need to see food and farming strategy, as others have said, to go hand in hand with environment strategy. As you suggest, that requires a cross-departmental approach. And I'm pleased to say that as a party, we are currently looking at this quite in depth. We've got a live policy working group reviewing food and farming strategy and policy for the party, which is chaired by Stuart Roberts, who's the ex-chair of the NFU. So our party conference, which is our sovereign policy making body, will be considering the outputs of that at our next autumn conference. And I hope we'll have a really strong offer going into the next election, building on some of the things we've done before. Just on free school meals, I know there's a specific question on that coming up, but so I won't go too much into that. But I think we've always been really leading on that particular issue as a party, and on children's health and public health. As a Liberal party, we're always trying to strike the right balance between the rights of the individual and also the importance of supporting and promoting and incentivizing good public health. So that will always be a live debate in a Liberal party.
We'll come back to that, but can I just go back to Daniel? Should it be a Labour government this time? Let me just go back to that recent report that I mentioned about farmers getting sometimes less than 1p out of the pound that we pass over at the till. What specific interventions can your government, any government make to ensure that farmers get better rewards for their work? And have the means to farm more sustainably, as we say, and attract young people onto the land?
That is a huge set of questions, Sheila, which I will not try and I could speak for hours on all those points, but yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we all know that there's a real problem in all the supply chains. I led for Labour on the Agriculture Act, which is the biggest piece of agricultural legislation for 40 years. And Vicky Hurd's done a huge amount of work on this over many years and impressed upon me that basic point about supply chain fairness, particularly in things like the pig sector, dairy sector, poultry sector. We've seen amazing conglomeration, if you like, of those sectors, and very little transparency. It's very hard to know how those major companies operate. And what we have seen, of course, particularly with the egg sector just recently, is this extraordinary situation where consumers are paying a lot more, but very little of it is getting down the chain to those on the front line. So there's something wrong in that system. How you then tackle that, the Grocery Code Adjudicator could play a role, and certainly during the Agriculture Act, Labour argued it should be strengthened. In fact, the government at the moment seems to be almost going, there was reference to this in the earlier session, if you're going the wrong direction, trying to fold it into Competition and Markets Authority. Basically, getting that supply chain's transparency and openness is probably going to be the key. But I wouldn't underestimate how difficult this is. We're talking about major international corporations here who have huge power. And government, I think, has got a very, very important role in trying to counterbalance that on behalf of producers.
And I don't think Britain is powerful enough to do a Franklin Delano Roosevelt and break up those big companies, because I mean, they are at the heart of it, and they're at the heart of why what you just described in the egg shortage. And yet so much of the public conversation about eggs seems to be that, you know, it's all avian flu and the Ukraine war.
Well, that is not the case. And the producers were warning about this many, many months ago. But I mean, the retailers have huge power. They also actually, through COVID, kept the shelves supplied. So it's not just about rubbishing what they do, but it's about trying to get proper fairness in. And from the retailer's point of view, if those producers are forced out, and it's not just the egg producers. I was hearing about onion growers, leek growers, tomato growers, cucumber growers. They will step away from doing that. And then we will
already stepping away.
Absolutely, they are. They're not planting. The poultry producers will not necessarily be producing poultry next year. The end result will be, far from being a more food secure nation, which is where most of us would like to be going, we risk becoming more dependent upon imports, which will be to lower standards, almost certainly, and also make us more vulnerable. So it's a national security issue as well, which is why this should be pretty central to the political discussion.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that last week the former head of MI5, Lady Manning Bullers, I can't remember her name, said that food is a national security issue, and that politicians have to start thinking differently. Joe, what do you make of what Daniel's just said?
Yes, so I mean, I just wanted to pick up on the national security issue, because food security is absolutely key to you know, the health of the nation in every aspect, and I do think that that there is a government role for working closely with the farming community to work out what we need. So earlier in the year I went to Lebanon, and you might recall that the first grain ship out of Ukraine was to Lebanon. Their bread prices have gone up sort of 2,000%, and the risk of, you know, unrest and really catastrophic situation was as a result of food shortage. And you know, I think that, I mean, both our own domestic food production, but also as other parts of the world become unsustainable through climate change, there really does need to be a much more strategic and long-term plan as to how we support the farming industry to be growing, you know, the right things in the long term, but also incentivize the things that we need. Because I don't think, I mean, I spoke to farmers recently and they said, we just need government to kind of tell us what to grow or what to do. You know, currently land use is used for energy, it's used for food production, it's used for, you know, nature recovery and biofuels and all that sort of thing. But knowing how much we need for each of these things, I think, is massively important. And we do need to be to looking at it as an issue of major sort of national security going forward.
I mean, Daniel said that my question was way too big, and you know, we could spend, you know, seminars talking about that. But could you pick out 2 or 3 things that a government, your government, could do right now that would make life easier for farmers?
Wow, that's a big one as well, isn't it? I mean, I think obviously look at the one of the presenters earlier showed that slice of bread and the sort of crumbs that farmers are left with. So actually looking at the sort of fairness of the food system, and to what extent government should intervene, or to what extent consumers also have a role to play in lobbying supermarkets. If, you know, when you see the chart that the supermarkets are getting, I don't know, 10 times the profit that their suppliers are. I remember going back a few years, there was a campaign on milk around that very issue, because, you know, dairy farmers said it's just not worth us producing milk anymore because we're actually selling it at a loss. And I think as consumers, we all have a role to say, you know, we want good food, we want best farming practice, and if that costs more money, you know, possibly there should be penalties for people who don't have the same good practices. So I mean, I've always argued for the idea that we want good food to be affordable, and we want food that doesn't, you know, causes us harm effectively because of its lack of health content, to be more expensive. And, you know, when we've talked things like the sugar tax, that obviously has played its role. I think we need to kind of look more broadly at the differences in cost between healthy options and less healthy options.
I mean, last December the 1st, I think the sugar reduction report came out. It was slid out. There was no press release, which showed that voluntary action on reducing sugar was a terrible failure. I mean, the goal had been 20%. What they achieved was 3%. You know, we know that legislation on sugar reduction works. Why is there this ideological thing that food industry, which is answerable only to its shareholders, why would they do that? You know, it's not in their interest.
No. So what is in their interest if they have the sort of, it's the carrot and stick thing, isn't it? It's sort of, if you don't regulate yourselves, we'll step in and you know, it'll be far worse. I mean, I do think, to be fair to the food and drink industry, that reformulations, you know, have helped. But I also think the consumer has a role to play in making healthier choices, because if you look in supermarkets now, the massive change as opposed to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where, you know, if you don't, people with allergies, if you don't, you know, want dairy milk, you can have soy or almond milk. All these choices weren't available a few years ago, and or plant-based foods. There are far more, and you know, I don't believe that if consumers didn't buy them, supermarkets wouldn't sell them. So it's actually about us also making better choices and not buying the things that are not good for us. But that's also about a public health education campaign, I would suggest.
I think we're looking at the time. We better move on to our school meals, even though it'd be nice to go on talking about that. Munira, let's the question first to all of you, but first to you. Scotland and Wales are already rolling out free school meals in primary schools. Why isn't that happening in England? I mean, that's a question for Joe, really. And when the need seems obvious. And we've seen this research done by Chefs in Schools, which is a sizable school catering company and a charity in the south of England. And they said, I mean, it's sort of beyond shocking, really, that 83% of the teachers report in that survey, they have children coming to school hungry, often with little or no money to buy lunch or very little in their lunch boxes. With evidence like that, why isn't England following Scotland and Wales?
Well, as you say, this is a question for the Conservative government, which I have posed on several occasions in the House of Commons. I mean, you read out some statistics there. I think that some data from October suggested 1 in 4 households with children are suffering food insecurity, which means there will be times when people in that household are going hungry and not able to put food on the table simply because they can't afford it. You know, the Liberal Democrats, when we were in coalition, we fought tooth and nail to introduce universal free school meals to all infants in primary schools, and we would like to have gone a step further and then expanded that to all junior school children, and that's certainly something we've campaigned for in the past. I mean, at the moment, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, as you say, I am regularly hearing stories, even in a relatively affluent constituency like Twickenham. Of course, we have areas of deprivation. I'm hearing stories of children going to school hungry or parents going without in it to enable them to be able to to be able to pay for lunch. At the very least, we should be looking to expand a free school meal eligibility to every family that's on universal credit, whether it's a primary child or a secondary child. In fact, that was one of Henry Dimbleby's first recommendations in the first part of his report. He then watered that down slightly, knowing that that was a big ask of government, but even his sort of secondary recommendation, which was less generous, was rejected. I think there is both a moral and an economic and an educational case to be expanding free school meal eligibility. As you say, we know that hungry children can't learn. It impacts their physical health and their mental health. PwC have done some economic analysis to show that actually for every £1 spent on free school meals, that would generate £1.38 in core benefits, including £2.9 billion in increased lifetime earnings. So there is an economic case to be made for free school meals. There's an educational intervention case to be made. So even if Conservatives feel uncomfortable that this is perhaps seen as a welfare intervention, I think there are many other strong arguments to be made. And frankly, I think it's morally wrong that we've got children going to school hungry in this day and age. Right now, at the height of the cost of living crisis, even if it's on a temporary basis, I think we should expand universal free school meals to all primary children, just so that we can ensure that every child is getting at least one hot meal a day when we know that parents are struggling to put food on the table in the evening.
All right. Joe, of course, I'm coming to you now as a representative of the government, because the government could change this by expanding eligibility to all households receiving universal credit. Children in England are definitely the worst off. I mean, the eligibility thresholds here for free school meals are a family income of under 7,400, which, it's just unbelievably low. In Northern Ireland, the threshold is 14,000. In Wales and Scotland, as we've already said, all primary school children qualify. The government could do something easily right now.
Yes, I'm not going to disagree with anybody. Can I just, before I go into that, go back? One of your questions from Sean Turner said that I was wrong, that I said it was about individual behaviour change, about consumers making a difference. I absolutely don't suggest that that consumers alone are responsible for their own health. That's not, and has never been what I've been saying. I think we need a change of the food environment, and that's key. So in terms of school meals and provision, I have long said that a child who's hungry can't learn properly. And when we're looking at educational attainment in areas like Stoke-on-Trent, the importance of having a good school meal, and that would extend to breakfast. I know Magic Breakfast have done some great work in this space, is important. However, I'd like to kind of go even a step further to say it's not, just a hot meal isn't good enough. We have to make sure that the quality of the school meals is sufficient, that, because this is about good food, not just food. And I think that's key. So possibly, I know that the actual cost per plate of school meals hasn't gone up for a long time. So what you can actually buy with that money is quite challenging if you're going to provide a healthy meal. The other thing I'm really keen to see is that things like fizzy drinks machines in schools have no place. I know that we've got an issue with poor teeth, and poor teeth equals poor health, and a lifetime of poor health. And when you see Coca-Cola machines in primary schools, I mean, that just
Do you actually see Coca-Cola?
Yes. So Stoke has a wonderful campaign called Keep Stoke Smiling, and an orthodontist from our hospital goes into schools, and she said she's seen this, or teachers that might say, well, you need to keep your energy up, so make sure you've got some sweets when we're going on a mile hike for charity. There is a lack of understanding of nutrition, I think, to put it bluntly, and we need to challenge that. We need to make sure that people understand, and I don't mean that in a patronising way, you know, that food is so important. I mean, basically, it's simple as.
Yeah. Daniel, what would a Labour government do? Would they raise the thresholds or for school meals, or would they introduce universal school meals for primary and secondary, or make primary school meals free? I mean, you're likely to be in power quite soon, so you must be thinking about these things.
Well, we don't know that, Sheila, I'm afraid.
No, of course not.
You know,
People are making bets,
two
right?
years is a very long time. And I've been in politics long enough to know that things not only can change quickly, but also the kind of campaigning that Labour faces against Labour will mean that anything Labour politicians say will be amplified, let's say, and misrepresented. So we have to be very, very careful. Now, a few weeks ago, obviously, we had a very different government from the current Conservative government. So I can't tell you today what the Labour's proposals will be until we get much closer to an election. What I can tell you is that at the Labour conference, Bridget Phillipson announced a major programme of breakfast clubs, which I think is actually really quite important too, because having children fed at the start of the day is important as well as in the middle of the day. But I can tell you my view as a shadow food minister is I absolutely agree with what Munira and Joe have been saying. I think the evidence is pretty clear of the benefits, both educationally and in health terms, and overall in economic terms. But my responsibility is to give Labour the opportunity of getting elected. And I'm afraid too often, as I say, anything that Labour spokespeople say in between election campaigns then gets misrepresented. So sadly, we can't have the perhaps open and frank dialogue we'd like to have. But that's the kind of country we live in, unfortunately.
Although you must take heart from that poll which showed that 72% of the UK public support free school meals for people on universal credit.
Absolutely,
I mean,
but Sheila, as you know, one can take a whole series of things that people say they support, and that doesn't necessarily translate into the way they vote in an election. I've got a responsibility to make sure there's every chance a Labour government gets elected. So whilst I'd enthusiastically endorse many of the things that are being said, until we know what the economic situation is at the time, as I say, we've just seen in the last few months huge changes both in the economic situation and in terms of tax policy from the current government. It's very hard for us to predict the situation we will be in. But what I would also say is I think it's interesting seeing some of the work being done by councils across the country, some of the London councils with very high levels of current free school meals. They are topping up and introducing universal provision effectively. Now, it shouldn't be, in my view, for local government to have to find that extra, because they are already pretty hard pressed, but they can see the benefit. And certainly I don't need persuading of the benefit. It's a question in the end of a series of priorities when we come to an election.
Yeah. As you probably heard, Therese Coffey, the DEFRA minister, said at her session within the Environment and Climate Change Committee in the Lords recently that she trusted British people to act like adults about food, so she isn't going to interfere in the food system, which is back to that fear of the nanny state. Is that really still a functioning argument, given all that we now know about childhood obesity, adult ill health, and sales of ultra-processed foods that are apparently cheap at the till and backed up by zillions of pounds in advertising? Can you really rationally hold that point of view, Munira?
Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies. Sorry, I had my hand up before. If I may, I just wanted to pick up on a point that Joe made about free school meals, that it's not just about a hot meal, it's also about a healthy and a decent meal. I 100% agree with that. The funding, however, has not followed. If you look at universal infant free school meals, when they were introduced during the coalition government in 2014, the allowance to schools for that was £2.30 per meal. It only rose by 4 pence until earlier this year. And you can look at food inflation in comparison. And I know that schools locally have told me they're having to cross-subsidise from already hard-pressed budgets, and then they're just either their own budgets or they're having to charge other children more. So it needs to be funded properly so that it is both a hot and a healthy meal. On your question about the obesity strategy, I mean, I think it was deeply disappointing that the government is trying to row back on some of its commitments in this area. Yes, there is, as I sort of alluded to earlier, there is a tight rope to be walked between individual liberties and also promoting public health. But when you look at the strain that our NHS is under from long-term chronic conditions such as obesity and diabetes, I think it's incumbent upon government to be doing more. We certainly do support restricting the marketing of junk food and closing some of the loopholes in the soft drinks industry levy. I think there is more of a role for government to play and be trying to support people to make healthier choices. But it is very difficult when you're on a super tight income sometimes to make those healthier choices. I think Joe earlier on was talking about people going and buying healthier options in the supermarkets. Well, quite often those things are more expensive, and that's a
but as we sort of touched on earlier, they're more expensive because of structural problems. We're not subsidizing vegetables and fruit, but we are subsidizing biscuits and sugar.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So I think we're in violent agreement, Sheila. That's the problem.
That's that. Yes. Where is this? Where is this person who's going to say, no, you're all wrong?
You need to get a different
Tory
on.
Therese Coffey. I think you needed to get Therese Coffey on this panel.
I know, she should have been here. I mean, because she does seem to have this fear of the nanny state. And I'm afraid it sounds to me as though she doesn't really understand what food, the way the food system works.
Well, I remember being a fresh-faced MP staffer when the smoking ban in indoor spaces was being considered, and I remember all of those debates being had back then. And now I think the vast majority of people certainly wouldn't want to turn the clock back and go back to that situation. And we've seen smoking rates drop as a result, and we're all I much prefer going out to a restaurant or a bar nowadays. So I think sometimes governments just have to show leadership and
Well, Joe, I mean, sorry, Munira, I'm anxiously looking at because we need to take some questions. Joe, are you happy with your Secretary of State at DEFRA?
I think you've heard from the conversation that I would rather we had policies that reflected how we need to address it. As I say, that the National Food Strategy for me was a really important piece of work, and the recommendations I think are key to sorting out some of these problems. And so I've always backed it, and therefore I've always not quite been in alignment. What I would say though is Daniel was reluctant to say what a future Labour government would do, and I think we have to bear in mind that in government it's a lot more difficult than in opposition. To tackle some of these things. And sadly, my experience as chair of the APPG on the National Food Strategy was that that the discussion was very much around child poverty equals bad Tory government, and therefore many of my Conservative colleagues felt that it was a kind of toxic debate. And I think that's really sad, and I'm really welcome the fact that today you've had politicians from 3 different parties who are able to actually talk sensibly the same language. And I just wish that it had been easier. And I think that I wasn't helped, I have to say, by members of the opposition on my committee in trying to encourage more Conservative colleagues to come and have the conversation, because there's a lot of white noise in Westminster, and people will often sort of hone in on things that they are particularly interested in. This became, as I say, through the kind of free school meals debate, it turned into a kind of toxic debate that people walked away from, rather than seeing that it was something that we actually had to engage with much more productively. And I feel sad about that, but I mean I also understand that that we have to come together. And I know that I think next week there's a 10-minute rule bill, isn't there, Daniel, free school meals. And again, you know, I will be in a difficult position because it shouldn't be about, you know, naming and shaming people who vote this way or the other. It actually should be about all coming together and supporting and encouraging government to do the right thing that we all see, you know, will benefit children, will benefit farmers, will benefit the environment. And so I've tried to always work in a positive way. I mean, I hope that people will recognise that it's not always been easy, but I think that that's the only way we will make progress within this debate, within this government.
Yes, I mean, it's very impressive that all three of you you're on the same side with, you know, minor differences. I was listening this before I came on, before this started. I was listening to a food program where Henry Dimbleby, this was in 2021, and he said, post-COVID, there's a huge energy for change. If we don't do that, nature will collapse. If we don't take that change, we don't do that, nature will collapse. Our hospitals will be overrun, much, much more expensive, treating an even worse health disaster than we have at the moment. And either way, there's going to be change. The question is, do we want to lead the change before it gets that bad? Change is coming. And I suppose you three are all grasp that change is coming, that politicians have the chance to lead the change. I mean, you know, that was quite, it saw into the future, because we can already see the health system is under tremendous pressure this winter. I mean, it is going to be near collapse. And this way of not seeing the connection between that and the food system is fantastically damaging. I mean, is Labour going to do any better, Daniel?
Well, look, going back to Henry's analysis, and I mean, I don't want to over politicize this, but I do think, I mean, Theresa Coffey's position seems to me to be a very extreme one, which is essentially, and George Eustace's wasn't that different. The market fundamentalists, effectively, no real place for intervention. And what struck me with Henry Dimbleby's report was it was pretty clear that many people in the food industry themselves recognize the junk food cycle to be a real problem, but none of them can deal with it on their own. Only government can intervene to make it possible for them to make the changes they want to make. So there's a fundamental political choice here. You either keep going down the no plan, leave it to the market route, or you intervene. And I think we all know what, you know, where the parties stand on that. So my answer to your question, Sheila, is yes, we will try. We will try, but we've got to take the public with us. And in democratic politics, that's sometimes quite difficult. So we are playing that delicate balancing act as well. But my view on consumer choice and so on is make it easier for people to make the right choices. And one of the ways you do that is you withdraw what are absolutely clearly the wrong choices. And at the moment, we don't really have much of a mechanism for that. Providing it's safe, in inverted commas, it's allowed. Well, actually, we can do much better than that. And I do genuinely think that actually towards the end of the tail end of the last Labour government, that's where Hilary Benn and Gordon Brown were going. I'm afraid their plans weren't then adopted in 2010. So it's up to us to pick them up now, and that's what we will do.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to go to some questions now. I mean, thank you, Daniel. There's a question from Tim Webb, and he says the World Wildlife Fund, it's disappeared now. No.
I am sorry, Sheila, I just answered it.
If you look in the answered section at the top in the middle, you can find that question again, if you wish.
Okay. Well, what he was saying was that there should be a requirement for food imports, that food imports match the regulations that are followed in Britain. Would any party support that? Well, of course, actually, the trade deals that have come down the turnpike so far have not. You know, we're not going to do that, are we, Joe? I mean, we have a trade deal with Australia, which is going to grossly undercut the standards that we have here.
So, I mean, the narrative from the Department for International Trade was always that we will maintain our standards, and we will maintain our standards in trade deals. So I'm not quite sure how that works out. I would be disappointed if that wasn't the case. you know, I see it across not just food actually, but obviously I come from a ceramics city, and you know, you have dumping of cheap products from China, and you know, it's a big problem across many industries in the UK, and food being, you know, crucial. That we if we set really high standards, that we mustn't open the floodgates to lower standards coming and lower standards but cheaper, and that's the problem, isn't it? That people will then, who are on, you know, low incomes, will get the cheaper and less healthy options, which is what we really want to avoid. Can I just say I was quite amused to see Sheffley in the last section did an analysis of what it costs to cook on various things, and the cheapest way to produce a meal was in a pressure cooker. Now I've used a pressure
Just
cooker
about to make a program about that. Yes.
for many years, and when I mentioned it to, I think it's a generational thing, you know, to the millennials, they go with sort of, what's a pressure cooker, and you know, it's a bit scary, isn't it, because it sounds like it's going to explode. So maybe, yeah, I was going to say, Sheila, maybe that's one for you to say about, you know, how to cook wonderful one meal, you know, stews for the week in a pressure
I think
cooker.
we might have to go back to the head, right?
I'm just popping in to say that we're right at the end of our conference. So I wonder if you might wrap up now. Thank you so much.
Well, there was I, Kath, thinking that we could happily go on for 3 or 4 more minutes, but clearly we can't. 3/4 of an hour, it was nowhere near long enough to hear all your really interesting thoughts. I feel very privileged, actually, to have chaired a panel with you 3 on it. It gives me hope for the future, actually. I hope it gave our audience some hope for the future in these dark times. So thank you all very much.
And thank you, Sheila, for chairing. I really deeply appreciate you holding this space for us. I'm just going to wrap up just with a few final comments, because we did promise our audience that we would finish on time. I am slightly amused that we ended up on a comment about pressure cookers, because I work for an organisation that likes to put pressure on in lots of different ways, through campaigns, through policy briefs, sometimes in an angry and shouty way, as Professor Ha-Joon Chang said at the beginning of our conference, sometimes through polite means, sometimes facilitating, sometimes shouting. And I wanted to reflect on what we should take away with us today as an audience, as a food movement. You'll all have your own answers to that question, and I've been listening throughout, and for me it's this. I think there's a narrative at the moment that says we just have to knuckle down and bear the pain of low incomes and low profits and low wages that affect food and farming. Somehow that narrative says we have to accept that children will go hungry and will sit hungry in their classrooms, and that farmers will have pitiful profits and will not be able to have the money to make the changes they now need to make, that we will have to accept food of lower standards and less food security. There's also a narrative that says there's little more we can do than weather the storm, that hungry people need to turn to charity, and that charity is a good thing in that context. And also, weirdly, that there's a limited amount that government can do. And I don't believe those stories are true, and they are just stories. Actually, the MPs who've just spoken here do agree with a different type of story. Let's all tell a different narrative, as Pete from Nourish Scotland said, because at the moment there is, as Sean said earlier, a triumph of ideology over anything remotely sensible. A brilliant quote, Sean. What I've heard today is that there's plenty we can do. We don't have limited powers. It takes bold and principled policy. It takes structures and accountability that cultivate action. It takes a good food nation bill that brings it all together and makes sure it's people's jobs. It takes us all having keen attention both on the policy and on where the money flows, as many of our speakers have pointed out. For my part, I've also heard that there is great power in working in alliance. I help to run an alliance. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I really think more than ever that concerted campaigning and policy work is needed more than ever. And that's our job. And I mean our job, all of us in this virtual room. Please join us in doing it. If you're a policymaker, get in touch and see how we can support you. Those who are more progressive on these kind of things, we can help to boost the message, to help bring in resources and people who can help to turn this into policy. If there's a food partnership in your area, get involved in it, support it. If not, start one. Why not? These things, when we join up to try and solve the problems, seem to go much better. To support Sustain the Alliance's campaigns, get on our Alliance newsletters. Those are where lots of information gets shared, key moments, opportunities to get involved. I want to just end on saying thank you. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you in all the ways that people in our Alliance and people that we work with do your bit to help make a better food and farming system. Thank you particularly to everybody behind the scenes for organising this conference today. There are a lot of them and they're fantastic. And thank you to you, the audience. We really look forward to working with you, friends and colleagues, old and new, as we step into 2023. Thank you very much. And that's the end of the Sustain Annual Conference. Thank you.